You all set, Rick? All right, I'll call the meeting to order. First item is the minutes from November 13th. So they read them. They should make a motion. For a second. Any discussion on the minutes? All those in favor? Aye. Opposed? No. Okay, update on DHY.
Sure, I'll chime in. The subgroup meetings, well, the subgroup that's been meeting monthly since June of 2017 continues to meet. They've been meeting the third Friday morning of every month. Last couple months, they've actually been meeting just about every 2 weeks. But then they've been just trying to get comments from their local communities now. So there's, I guess, subgroups to subgroups that have actually been formed. Each community is doing it a little differently. Here in Yarmouth, you formed a subgroup with 2 of your selectmen and the chair of the finance committee and chair of this committee. We have another meeting this Thursday at 4:30. We've had one meeting to review the draft agreement, which has been circulated. It's the latest version that's been created by the townwide subgroups. Dennis is setting up a meeting. They're going to do similar, smaller group, finance committee members, selectmen. Harwich chose to do a little different. They invited selectmen, capital outlay committee and finance committee to a general meeting. So we made a presentation to that larger group to get comments. A lot of good discussion on that. I think overall, in general, each community has their own questions. Some people have brought up some things that I think we'll have to go back and fine tune. But I think overall, there's a lot of positive feedback and overall positive feeling for the agreement. Everybody wants to see the costs, which we're feverishly cranking away at. Hope to have them in the next couple of weeks to disseminate out to the different communities. But our pitch has always been, develop the framework, develop the concepts of what you agree to, and then we can crunch the numbers and you'll see what the numbers are versus trying to say, I'm not doing that unless I get a $10 million savings or whatever the number is you have in your mind. Because I think the number will be different versus what you think. So the focus has been on the concepts of the agreement. And as we've discussed previously, the special legislation was filed. It was approved by all 3 towns. So Representative Whalen and the other representatives and senators actually filed it. Even though they're out of session, it can pass if there's no one objects to it. But they didn't think it would actually get addressed until sometime in December anyway, with so much other things going on. So I think Dan was actually reaching out to Representative Whalen to try and get a status update. I don't know if he's heard anything back. So that's where we are on that. Happy to answer any questions.
Yeah, it seems from my experience in those, there's a lot of wordsmithing going on too, which is good. It means you're just down to find points at this. I don't think there's any, like you said, any great sticking points to anybody to get this finished up.
Yeah, the overall timeline, looking bigger picture for that is try and get that local feedback back to the main subgroup. They will then make any revisions based on that feedback to the agreement. And then the thought was to have another 3-town meeting to actually present it publicly to anyone, the general public. Then bring that back again to each community based on that form. Any edits, wordsmithing needs to be done at that point. And then it would be brought back to the towns in January, and the appropriate boards in each community would decide at that point, whether they want to move forward with a article at their May town meeting. Obviously, there need to be a lot of public outreach between that time and the town meeting. Make sure everybody understands what is being voted on, what they're approving, what future commitments would be, and what, the costs are, cost savings, versus doing your own in-town solution, which all three communities have their own in-town solution. Obviously, we're trying to get you caught up and fine tune yours so that you'll have those costs as well to compare to, as well as we're trying to work with Barnstable to look at those options that I think we discussed a fair amount at the last meeting. Still working on that too. So,
Anybody have any questions about that?
No, I'm just wondering, at some point, Dave, will we have the opportunity to meet with the first group?
to meet with the subgroup from each of the three towns.
Well, no, our first committee, the selectmen, the town administrator.
Yeah, I'm sure anything can be arranged for, they're looking for any of the public input.
I was just wondering if it was in the pipeline.
Good idea.
Pardon?
That's why I said it's a good idea.
Yeah. We can bring that up. Kurt, you're at a lot of those meetings, you can.
Yeah.
Maybe we can put that in a specific schedule item or pipeline, or I'd be happy at your next meeting to walk through the presentation that we've been given to the different groups too, that gives the highlights of what's in the agreement.
That would be helpful, I would think.
I mean, you folks will be critical in terms of, and I'm sure your selectmen will be looking to you for a recommendation at some point of whether you think you should go the partnership route or the in-town route, or something need to be revised to address an issue that you have. So, absolutely, we need to get you up to date and up to speed.
Does everybody have the draft of that?
Yeah, I think that was in one of the earlier handouts.
So-
Yeah.
But I know there's a lot in there, so.
I was gonna say, if we're gonna meet, I think it'd be a good idea if everybody looks at it. If they have any questions, and when we have that joint meeting, have your questions ready to ask, or maybe some will come up as the meeting goes along, but if they have concerns, I think it's a good time to address them. Okay. Discussion on high-level timeline.
Kurt, I had included something in the packet. It was handed out as a 8.5 by 11, or 11 by 17 minutes. And Dave and Jeff, and all of you might have more details, but I wanted to get the ball rolling as to what we're looking at. And Karen had some comments, so the format and the look of this might change as we build it out, but figured this put a lot of the items in one place on one page that we could look at with some comments, and perhaps identify some action items so that we're all on board as to what we need to do. And so if you start at the bottom of the page, and Jeff, please feel free to, and Dave, to chime in with the specifics on some of these public works things, especially. We have an annual town meeting coming up for FY20. Our grant that's paying for our planning ends at the end of this fiscal year, June 30th, 2019. And so at this upcoming town meeting, at a minimum, we would need some sort of article to provide additional funding for ongoing efforts past June. So above and beyond that, we have some discussion points that I don't know we have to resolve tonight, but I wanted to put on the table for tonight that maybe we can resolve at an upcoming meeting. What do we need for planning money? We have DHY planning that will need to be ongoing. We have our own Town of Yarmouth planning efforts, CWMP, and the Parkers River and Willow Street design phases. So those two pieces go back to the discussion about taking advantage of the work that's being done on Route 28 as part of our project so that we minimize the costs for having to redo that work after the fact.
The Parkers River planning, is that for the bridge crossing as a pipe? Or is there other planning, is there some reason that's on there?
Where is that? Oh, Town
Down
of
the
Parkers
bottom.
River.
And I might
Well,
conflate
the
those.
reason we have this under planning is because at this point, We don't know that there's anything that needs to be done at Parker's River. The crossing, at least that was reviewed conceptually previously, was to the south of that, not necessarily attaching anything to the bridge or underneath the bridge. And so there wouldn't be design money necessarily at this point, but there might be some ongoing review or commentary that we'd want Dave and his team to take a look at as it relates to that as that project moves forward. Also for Willow Street, that's a similar situation in that right now in our discussions with Barnstable, there is a sleeve for wastewater expansion planned for that project that Barnstable has requested that goes east-west through that intersection. At this point, we don't know that there would be a need for an additional sleeve or pipe to be sized through that area. In fact, some of the discussions indicate that maybe we would, with the piping, bypass that intersection to the east or some other direction, potentially pumping directly into the collection system down south of that intersection. There's a lot of things that are unknowns at this point. So didn't put that in there as design work because we don't know that there's necessarily design effort needed for Willow Street either, but through an ongoing discussion with Dave and his team, that might be something we need to continue to look at as we talk about the Barnstable possibilities. But we do know that, so dropping down to design, we do know that the Route 28 Old Main Street intersection, that project's moving forward, and that we will need to have some design effort done for wastewater infrastructure within that project that the state won't pay for, but will accommodate as part of their project. The same could be said for the Route 28 Bass River Bridge. That's probably a little simpler of a design because at this point we just need to identify the appropriate size sleeve that could accommodate future wastewater expansion for that. So the design efforts related to the intersection are a little more extensive. We need to kind of scope that out and see what the level of effort might be, and if that's something we ask for at the Springtown meeting, we'll need to get some additional numbers together for that. It's on here simply as items that we need to be aware of. I really appreciate the effort that Rich made in pulling all this together, because these generally were just concepts that we were talking about in out years, and this really helps organize that effort. And what I'd say about this plan generally is like any kind of long range plan, it's a working document. Nothing's set in stone here, but it all gives us things to contemplate and plan for, potentially rearrange some things based upon other elements and variables that come into play. And so I think this is a great first draft of this effort. And again, it's going to be a working document. As we finish one year and go to the next, we'll continue to look further and further out, and the years might move around or things might be adjusted. That's fine, but at least it gets it down in one place that we could be thinking about it and trying to anticipate.
Well, it seems to me that our key things are the next 3 town meetings. And then things get more flexible as time goes on.
Absolutely.
There is one edit I would like to make, and that's instead of Willow Street, it should be Yarmouth Road, because that's what it is. Because when I looked at Willow Street, I said, okay, which Willow Street? At that point, it's Yarmouth Road. So that might make it clearer to people that that's the intersection.
I think just to add, I did confirm that I had a budget meeting this morning for the upcoming budget presentation. And at the moment, we've got $200,000 of free cash set aside for this purpose. So I guess it becomes incumbent upon me of working with Jeff and others to make sure that's sufficient for all these things we need to do.
That was my question, is that enough? Because we just finished capital budget. That's who was in here before this meeting. And we talked about some of the free cash needs, plus where some of it may be going, as far as, does it go to DPW building, does it go to this, plus a whole bunch of smaller issues that are going to be presented also.
So I'll fine tune that with Jeff. I think these will probably be our recommendations of why we need the money and the supporting reasons why we need the money.
Well, I think that's the thing with the state's construction schedule. I think they're going to drive what we need to do and when we need to do it. Or it's going to be a terribly lost opportunity, I think.
So further out past the immediate future, I just laid out a few items. So in 2020, so this is in starting July 1, 2019, the Willow Street intersection work, as I understand, is scheduled to start. But, these are approximate timeframes.
Yarmouth Road.
Yarmouth Road. Yeah. Yarmouth Road. Actually, I shouldn't say July, that's more of a October, that's a fall schedule.
I was gonna say, that's an awful tight
Yeah.
timeframe to
That's
get
in that-
money approved and get whatever engineering done that you need to get that in.
So Parkers River Bridge and Yarmouth Road. We'll have, in July of 19, we'll still have our ongoing effort for DHY and our Water Resources Management Plan. And we'll have a annual town meeting at the end of that fiscal year that we'll have to start considering at that point. Design money for DHY. Presuming that moves forward. We'll have to start thinking about our collection system for the town of Yarmouth and what we're going to do. So that's part of our discussion tonight, probably our phase 1 design money. And how are we going to fund the North Main and the Bass River Bridge construction. So that'll happen at the May 2020 town meeting as we sit here today.
You would probably also have your share of the design money for the treatment plant.
That's
Whether
right.
it's your own.
DHY
Yeah, I think that's
design.
what he's referring
That
to.
would include the plan.
Oh, so
Yeah,
it's,
any,
okay.
any collective infrastructure.
Okay.
And so also keep in our minds as we talk about financing, the next agenda item. What's the timing of when we start collecting some money to pay for some of this stuff? Because absent
Right.
having funds to pay for it, what are our options? Now, and probably at this beginning phase, we're probably talking, at that point, getting a bond authorization at town meeting, which gives us the opportunity to temporarily borrow. So we don't really need revenue, and we can keep rolling those temporary borrowings over 3 to 5 years to buy us that time to get revenue stream in place. So if the start is, say, July of 2000, or January of 2021, we could roll that out 3 to 5 years before we need to have a debt service schedule starting to be paid back on a recurring basis. We could buy ourselves some time through temporary borrowings. But those temporary borrowings do need some level of funding because they need to be rolled over each year, and you've got to pay interest as you roll them over. But in any event, that's a finer detail for a later time. But not too long from now, a year out from now, next town meeting from this spring, we'll be asking for some significant money if everything continues along the same path. The year following that, we'll be looking at the construction funds for both the DHY plant and infrastructure, as well as our phase 1 collection system. And Dave would know better than I, but as I understand, that's a multi-year, a 2-year plus process.
Yeah, what we've been planning is typically design 2 years, construction 3 years, but it could be 18 months, 3.5, depending on what you're designing and actually building. But within those 5-year phases that we've put forth, it's roughly 2 and 3.
And then, so I have it in here in FY24, but that's likely when we'll be start getting assessments. It could be off a year there, depending on the timing of everything. But at the earliest, I'd say that's probably when we ought to be expecting to have to do some financing mechanisms in place to pay for assessments to DHY or debt service on our collection system. We need something in place. So kind of working back from that, that kind of tells us when do we need to do some of the things that we're going to be talking about on the next agenda item as far as the financing. Whether it's a betterment, whether it's a real estate transfer tax, because that takes time to get in place to get the legislation and enact. Whether it's a wastewater infrastructure fund levy added to our tax levy, which can be combined with a reduction in CPA, which you may or may not control. So all those things take time. So I just put that one item for the funding at this year's town meeting, but you may want to have placeholders for some of these other items at this year's spring's town meeting. And if you don't have them at this May 2019 town meeting, we're probably looking at definitely wanting them at May 2020 town meeting. I don't have anything in here because it hasn't been our practice within the town, but there has been some discussion about fall special town meetings, which buys us some flexibility. So we could fit that into the timeline as, if we determine that that's what we need to do, I'll work with administration to get that in place and see if we can get that to come off, but otherwise, we got one bite at the apple each year. For this process, probably isn't practical.
Yeah, the other thing to keep in mind is this is focused on sort of the capital costs. You'd also have the operation and maintenance component that would come in. So within that 2-year design, 3-year construction, it's really the 3rd year that you'd potentially start to get some users tying into your system as pipes become available and treatment plants are available. So at some point, you're going to end up with the operation and maintenance costs, some users, or some you may not have enough users online that the town often ends up picking up a portion. Like I think Chatham is still paying 50% until they get enough users online. So
40 years later.
So there's the other component that you're going to have to factor in at some point.
You know, Mitch, it just seems to me that the town probably should be planning to have a special meeting along with an annual town meeting. Really, first of all, we jam everything into one town meeting. It takes all day. And I've noticed other towns, they break it up. They have a special town meeting in the fall and they have the annual town meeting in the spring or vice versa. And that way, you know, it doesn't take, it may take all day, but if you have really hot issues, but it just seems like, and with this program, we're gonna need a lot more flexibility than waiting until a town meeting is in May of every year. It's just not gonna happen. We're in this.
Well, even with the DHY agreement, I think the feeling is that it deserves its own special meeting. You know, it might not be the only topic, but
Right.
so I think it's inevitable, and I didn't say too much until I just wanted to present the timeline to the committee and get some feedback. But I even heard it at the, I think it was the last selectmen's meeting or 2 selectmen's meetings ago, where they discussed the need for a special town meeting for school issues and things like that, or to pull out the non-financial issues separately so that you can focus on them. And so I think I'll be putting in my 2 cents as far as advocating for a special town meeting because of these issues and this timeline. So now we've got something that we can work from as to why we would need that.
And does, even adding the special town meeting, adding another town meeting, does it require town meeting action? So we can't plan on it, it has to happen at,
I don't think so.
no?
We can call a town meeting.
We call it anytime.
Yeah.
Yeah, the
I
selectmen.
thought we had town meeting voting on the date. For
We
the
did last
annual,
time. I
it was
think
the
we did.
Saturday and the weekday.
Just.
That's why I'm asking, that's what I'm thinking,
The committee is meeting on that again on Thursday.
yeah.
So, I'm sorry, so the town has a specific bylaw that states when they can meet for a special town meeting or for an annual?
No,
town
for
meeting?
the annual town meeting is Saturday now.
So, right, so on a special town meeting, you set that date anytime you want.
Yeah, but there is a thought that we may do 1 or 2 things. One is go back to a spring night meeting, and another one doing a spring and fall, just planning on doing a spring and
In the
fall
fall,
meeting
which
every
some
year,
towns do.
which I think would be a
Right.
much more efficient way to run the
Right,
town.
and then you can add a special town meeting
If you need
anytime you
to.
want, at
Right.
any time during the course of the year. Okay.
Historically, I think the reason we've been doing it just one annual, there is a cost to having multiple town meetings, but
Yeah,
it almost seems unavoidable with the number of issues we have in front of us, so. the
yeah, I
cost
think
is
most
the
towns
cost.
will end up having a fall town meeting, almost every year.
The other
But
thing I
I think they plan on it.
The other thing I had a question on is, we seem to have to do things in advance, and I was thinking about some of the stuff that you sent to us, funding issues and how we're gonna pay for the systems and so forth. And I don't know, it seems to make sense to set up a fund. I think you mentioned it, I can't think of the name of it right off the top, but
The infrastructure investment.
Wastewater infrastructure fund.
you set up a fund like that, and then as we go along, I mean, obviously, we're gonna make some recommendations to the selectmen, and they're gonna make a final decision, and we're gonna put this on the town meeting and so forth, but it really makes sense as a minimum to have a separate infrastructure fund. In fact, I was thinking about having two funds, where one would be for just a wastewater treatment plant, and the other one would be collection system, force mains, pump stations, whatever.
So
So
To-
it's a regional, and then there's the
to your
town.
point, Dave just mentioned, cash flow is always the issue in doing a big project like this, and the timing of it never lines up perfectly.
Right.
You're not gonna, one of our funding mechanisms we'll be talking about is a capital surcharge on an operating rate.
Right.
Well, I only get that when you actually have people on it paying in as an operating fee. So that's not upfront, that's kind of near the end of the timeline. But you're gonna need money up front.
Right.
And even if you're putting things on a temporary borrowing note, you at least at a minimum have that interest cost, and that can't fund operating costs, that only can fund capital costs.
Right, so you can have a series of accounts that go
Yes.
into this fund.
Mhm.
You have one account where you're starting to collect, half of the CPA funds, if that's one of the items. And we need to start collecting some money in advance so we have money to work with. And we don't have to go to a big borrowing issue every time you need money. If we start now with assigning some kind of a tax fee, whatever we're gonna determine we're gonna use, and maybe you presented last time multiple sources of revenue. You could have an account for each one of those and set that up into a general fund.
Well, the fund, there's probably two funds, not to jump ahead too far, but that's why it was important to present this timeline, to give you the sense of when some of these things need to happen.
Right.
But there'd really be two funds probably that we're talking about. One is that wastewater infrastructure fund that would collect the surcharge on the tax levy that you'd be able to, town meeting could vote to have. That is set aside in and of itself. And the other would be an enterprise fund, and that's something, probably in the near term, Jeff and I will be getting together with town admin to talk about what that path looks like and how we might want that to look. It could be a standalone enterprise with just sewer operations, but part of what we would have to work out is, maybe we want to have other things. Maybe we would rope in our septage plant, which is already an enterprise fund, into it, and that might provide some seed money for some of these early stage things, because there's some surpluses in that we could utilize for septage versus sewer. It's all nitrogen removal. Or perhaps do we want to bring in and have a combined water and sewer and have a water resources enterprise fund?
That's what I was thinking. Rather than call it a wastewater fund,
And so,
having a more broad fund where you could have accounts within that fund.
Right.
And some rules as to, you can't be transferring money from one account to the other without some rules that dictate how you're gonna do all
so
that.
typically when you have those types of funds, what gets set up is a retained earnings, so to speak. And then you reserve out of that retained earnings for specific purposes, as long as it's provided within the law. So generally what you're gonna see reserved out of retained earnings out of operating would be things like for capital improvement. And so if you had a system development fee or a connection charge that went into this fund, perhaps our way we set it up and enabled it to be financed would be that those would be segregated under a separate fund balance, not part of the operating costs.
Right.
So they're set aside for infrastructure. So that's all the nitty gritty and the details. That's pretty far down the road. The main thing that we might have at either, probably not this town meeting, but maybe a fall town meeting, and probably, if not then, May 2020 town meeting would be votes on establishing those funds. And then the details, we work out as we go there, but really high level action that's needed is votes by town meeting to establish these things.
The change in CPA is calendar 20 or fiscal 20?
Fiscal
Is it
20.
calendar 20?
You can't change it for, CPA needs to stay in place through FY '20,
So it's fiscal year. So that's next year.
right? So you could have a vote at the next town meeting but it wouldn't
Take effect
redirect
till
any
year end.
funding until 21.
And I'd submit to you, and this is a discussion under the financing topic, but since you mentioned it, one's not necessarily incumbent upon the other. You could have a vote to establish the wastewater infrastructure fund, do nothing about CPA, and just have the fund. And the fund could be, we just want the fund established. We're not setting an amount, an additional tax yet. It could be zero, but we want the fund in place.
Right.
And we'll come back later to set up, or you could do 1% to start and do nothing with CPA. So CPA and the wastewater infrastructure fund, we tend to tie them together because we want net zero impact. If you took 1% here, you want to take 1% away over here, but we don't have to do that. And that might be a complication that you decide based on this timeline that you don't want to get into.
But it sounds like splitting even in half, it won't be enough money to do what we need to do. So do you consider splitting CPA in half and then adding another 0.5% or 1% to the wastewater fund, so it's actually accruing money faster?
Well, that's why I mentioned that,
Well, there's a
because
couple of different vehicles we can work on. That half of the CPA fund is just like one funding vehicle. You can have some others in there too.
They're coming out of the same pockets though, mostly.
Yeah.
So it's just a matter how you get the money. Again, when we get to operational costs, and I think you get a whole different scenario of who pays what and all that. But I think for the planning and construction purposes, you can't just dump it all on the phase one participants in the town. It won't work.
No.
It just bankrupt people.
but as far as timing goes, I'm going to keep this document out every time we have a meeting and as they meet with Jeff and others, and I'll just keep adding to it. I might change the format just so we have action items and have a kind of a plan of what things look like. Dave, I noticed you had a timeline. Is there anything you want to update?
Yeah, we just, the committee asked us last meeting what needed to be done between now and May if you're looking at a May town meeting to address either the DHY or your comprehensive wastewater management plan. So not a lot of detail, but, we put the main task up here that follows along with some of the slides that we'd had in previous presentations about, what you need to do to update your comprehensive wastewater management plan and what decisions or input you need to give us to keep you online, particularly for following along in the DHY discussions. Because, while you have an approved comprehensive wastewater management plan, it wasn't for the whole town. It was back in 2011. A lot's changed since then. Regarding DHY, Harwich has an approved comprehensive wastewater management plan, and Dennis has an approved draft plan, which they've been filing the final essentially until they decide whether they're doing their own or the DHY. So they're a little bit ahead of you. So what we did is we said, December, need to confirm the needs areas, which are those areas where you need to collect nitrogen from to meet the nitrogen removal in each of the watersheds, which is what we've been showing in the 8-phase plan. Confirm the wastewater flow projections. We have flow numbers for those areas, but as we discussed a little bit last meeting, you may want to increase those flow numbers a little bit in your village center areas along Route 28 or any other areas that you want to consider smart growth for. And then look at confirm the phasing as we've been discussing it. You gave us some input at the last meeting, which we'll discuss in a little bit. But as we go through December, it'd be good to try to make sure that we're confirming that. So then when we lead into January, you'll be able to develop your cost recovery plan. I'm sure at that point, the costs will be out. People will say, well, how are we going to pay for this? And that's, when people start to pay attention, because it's all about what's coming out of my pocket. So that's when people will start asking you questions, and you'll be getting a lot of feedback. solicitor or otherwise. So, you need to start looking at your cost recovery options now, as you will be doing tonight. But probably in January, you'll be looking for at least a preliminary recommendation and finalizing that in February based on the timeframes that have been put forth as we sit here today. Look at finalizing the recommended program for the town of Yarmouth, the in-town solution anyway. And we'll continue and hopefully have more definition on the Barnstable option. We're still waiting for some input from them. We're recrunching some numbers, fine-tuning the flows. So hopefully in January, we'll be able to have better insight on that. May not have final decisions, but we should have a lot close to being able to make at least some preliminary recommendations there. So then leading into February, again, looking for a preliminary recommendation, particularly from this group. I would think the selectmen would be looking for your preliminary thoughts, looking at your preliminary thoughts on the DHY discussions and what you might be recommending in regard to that. So that gets into the question, asked earlier about making sure you folks, you've got the agreement, but we'd be happy to go through that presentation of the agreement at one of the next meetings to give you the highlights there, because I know there's a lot in it. And then continuing discussions on the Mass Department of Transportation coordination, preliminary designs, whatever needs to be done there. And then leading into March, that's where, if it truly has been decided that you're going to a May town meeting, you've got a lot of public input and public outreach that would need to be done leading up to that May timeframe. That's where we'd be doing the brochures, the cable programs, whatever other formats the committee wants to undertake. And then, making sure that's all being implemented, and those discussions, you're out meeting with, the Chamber of Commerce or whatever committees you've got in town, or local citizens groups, garden clubs, whoever you want to undertake to get that information out leading up to town meeting in May, so that everyone is informed the best they can be leading to that town meeting. Now, as you just discussed a little bit, somewhere along the line, somewhere in that time frame, someone may say, that's too much to undertake between now and May, and you want to do that and do it in a special town meeting. But as we sit here today, those are sort of the main tasks that we see that would need to be completed or input provided by month leading up to the May town meeting.
For the May town meeting is May 4th. When does the warrant close on that? Does anybody know?
Usually April 1st is the deadline that they set, and I think there's a little flexibility in there, but April 1st is a good guide that is generally the stated deadline.
Well, I think the warrant closes in January.
January, yeah.
So as far as an
That's the
article
right thing.
placed,
Right.
I mean, say.
placeholders.
But you can do
Put
placeholders.
placeholders
we
and
can
then,
figure what
Just
those
need
are.
some placeholders.
You need everything finalized by April 1st.
Right.
I have a little bit of a problem in the public outreach, the informing of the public of all the work that is being done. As I look at that, I see that the outreach is really going to blast into the community in April. And that gives us 34 days to inform the public upon whom the entire project depends. Now, to inform the public in 34 days and have them oriented towards the approval of the cost of this program and the complexity of it, I do not believe can be accomplished in 34 days. I think it should have started a year ago, but since that would be a little bit premature, we should now contract with a public relations firm. I don't know. I had the opportunity of speaking with Jeff yesterday, and he said that he had an awareness of a group called the Consensus Institute. And I don't care what you want to call it. I think it's a PR, it would possibly be a PR group. And I mean that in a very positive and complimentary way. But I think we desperately need public relations to assist us, separate from the excellent work that is being done in engineering and design and finance. We need that, and we need it now. Thank you.
Just to help clarify, I didn't mean that you wouldn't start working on outreach until those times. Those were more or less completion dates that I was putting up there. I mean, we've been talking about the needs. We've been talking about cost recovery. We've been talking, those are when you would those would be your completion dates, not your start.
And Dave, what are you anticipating for May 2019 town meeting as being voted?
I was presuming that's the timeline if you were going to look at the DHY partnership.
Right. So it's
but
not,
you may have made a
not
decision in January that you're going to do your own in-town solution, and you could make that decision and do funding for an in-town solution.
But the DHY, presuming we're going down that track and we're almost at the end of that process, that vote is a commitment to that partnership, but it's not providing any financing above and beyond. But
Correct.
It's just, here's the agreement and we're accepting the agreement.
If that's what the three towns decide, that's all they're going to do is just endorse the agreement and not do any money to start the process. That decision hasn't been made.
What would start the process?
Well, one time when the subcommittee, which was 2 years out at that time, they said, the first town meeting, because you're going to have town meeting members there, if they support the partnership, you might as well get the design money.
Right.
Versus risking having the partnership approved, and then a year later or 6 months later at a fall town meeting, presuming you're going to get enough voters to show up and then endorse funding for the design.
And you'd also need, depending on how it gets funded, you need a ballot question at the same time.
This goes back to the earlier discussion, which fits into kind of
Right.
what you're saying about, a need for a fall town meeting, because all this happening before May is a pretty tight.
Well, we have the money now to do it. Are you saying, if those are the completion dates, when would you say, and do you feel it's necessary to inform the public?
Oh, absolutely.
When should we start?
Yesterday. Couldn't agree with you more.
Well, let's make a motion to ask somebody in the town administration to contact a public relations firm. We'll employ them. We've got the money, and they'll start within
Well,
a short period of time.
I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt.
Please, go ahead.
We handed out, I think, the 3 brochures we've done in Harwich previously, which worked well. I think we reviewed the different cable programs we helped the local committee do there. So by all means, you can bring another firm in if you like, but we're already under contract to help you do some of what I think you're envisioning, Tom, in terms of brochures. And just to review, we did a 12-page brochure that more or less summarized the comprehensive wastewater management plan, which is this thick. We did a 4-page brochure that, brought forth all the town meeting articles that they were leading up to the town meeting at that time. Talked about the funding, how it was going to be paid for, had a question and answer session at the back based on questions that have been being generated, the top 10 questions type of thing. And then we did a 1-page brochure, both sides, that answered the, if I'm connected to the sewer, what are my costs? If I'm not connected to the sewer, what are my costs? And if we don't do anything and DEP comes in and says, I'm going to declare it a nitrogen sensitive area, what are my costs? And then there were a few other brochures that got filtered in later at the last minute. We had boards being done. We wrote 3 cable programs, one on the financing, one on the need to do this, and one on what's being brought to town meeting. 7 to 8 minutes long, no longer, because people won't listen beyond that. So, and then we did two generic PowerPoints that any committee member, we went through it enough times, any committee member felt comfortable, they could go in with either a handout or actually put it up on PowerPoint and go to whatever committee they wanted to take it to, the men's club, the gardens club, whatever it was that they may have belonged to or already done, they felt comfortable doing that. We haven't been able to start that yet because we didn't know what program we were selling.
Well, I'm sure that if we were to get an independent agency to assist us in creating a positive public reaction, that you would work most closely with and contribute. But what I'm saying is you need a perspective that we have not yet availed ourselves of. What you have available is excellent and presented in a public relations presentation to the community. You mentioned the outstanding concepts that you've explained, and you suggest that somebody take it to the garden club. Well, we have maybe 17 members present at that garden club meeting. That is not representative of the community. There needs to be a comprehensive plan independent of the engineering, the finance, and the town administration to present to the public what they need to know to make a positive and intelligent decision on May 4th and each May up to 2024. Thank you.
I think this is an important discussion about outreach, and I think it's great that you're having that. I think it's important to get input from the committee as to what that might look like. In talking with Tom just the other day, I know that the previous committee met on a regular basis leading up to a key town meeting with constituent groups. Is that something that's worthwhile, or is there a different mechanism? I know that even though 2011 wasn't all that long ago, things have changed with technology, and there's certainly things out there that could be done that could be tweeted or reshared or posted, and that can be important tools to use as well. So all those types of elements do take some time to pull together. So I think the important discussion is if we need to start yesterday, what does that look like, and how do we accomplish that? So I think those are all kind of important topics. And to Tom's point as well, we do have some wastewater planning money that's reserved for efforts like this. To that extent, we talked about mailings. I don't know if that's something the committee would feel is appropriate, either a separate mailing or something with the water bills. Those are all possibilities. I've started to kind of look at some of those as far as what opportunities might be out there. But I think outreach is something we can do regularly throughout this program.
All right, so, and lost in all this is Tom made a motion. Does anybody care to second it?
I'll second.
Okay, so we already have some discussion going on. Do we have any more comments?
I have one
Go
question.
ahead. Okay, go ahead.
Did Harwich ever have a town meeting to vote on anything related to wastewater before?
Yes.
And did they also voted no previously and then voted
No,
yes this time?
they had never voted no on anything. What they did is they voted design money, and then they came back and voted construction money because they like to vote them separately
Right,
instead of
so-
one project cost.
So I would say it is a different thing for Yarmouth, and knowing the town of Yarmouth, I'm not from here, but I'm starting to get to know it, and it's a town where people dig their heels in a bit. And I do think that it's really important, the approach that's taken on this, and perhaps one that's maybe a little more delicately needed than in Harwich.
Yes. I mean, we only have one shot at this thing, and if it's shot down, you're not gonna be happy about it if you just did a half approach on it, right?
And then it's gonna get shut down again the next year, you know what I mean? Like, it's not gonna get easier.
No. So, given the fact that Yarmouth has already shot the thing down once, and mainly because I think it was putting all the burden on the taxpayers at that point. But maybe it wasn't, I wasn't here.
Some
then
people
either.
just didn't believe in it.
It wasn't really presented properly, professionally. I think what Tom is saying is we need to go with an all-out approach. Get some professionals in here who have done this before, that have a track record for this kind of thing, know what organizations we can pull together, and this organization could utilize everything that the professional engineers have done, which they've done an excellent job on. Pull it all together, make a presentation to each one of these groups in town, the Chamber of Commerce, the Historical Society, and maybe the focus is slightly different for each one of those. But the main thing is water quality is number one. We want clean water. It's number one on our list. And after that comes all the other benefits to the town. And my guess is if you, the way you've got it structured now, you're gonna build this thing over 40 years. I mean, anybody that's gonna take a vote on it, today is not gonna be here at the end of the program. Are they even gonna see the sewers in their lifetime? Maybe yes, maybe no. But we're looking at doing something for the town of Yarmouth, and the only way we're gonna ever get this through is to do it professionally. And if it gets shot down after that, I mean, you've done your best.
I'm just gonna disagree for just one point of bringing in some professional PR firms. I think it's very careful of how you go about that and who you get to do that. I've had some experience with bringing in outside PR firms on very controversial projects, and it hasn't gone well. And I think one of the issues has been that if you have an outside PR firm, especially if it's like a firm from Boston or something like that, you get that parochial view here where, well, that's what they're doing. They're spending money because they're just trying to shove it down our throat. They're just trying to make us believe, and they push back and push back. The experience that I've had with PR firms, outside PR firms who are, who do kind of a broad range of PR and not a specific as to the wastewater. As I said, I've had them on very controversial projects, and it hasn't gone well. And it's because they don't have a relationship with the town or with the people of the town, and they have a certain way of doing things, and that's the way that they do it. So it's kind of like, no, this is what we're going to do. We're going to, all these bells and whistles and what they want to do. It could just be the firms that I've worked with in the past, but
So
it hasn't been a lot of good and, give and take on that, because they're the way
I'm
that
sorry, I didn't mean to
that's okay.
interrupt.
That's the way that they want to do it. So I think that we do need to be careful if we're going to go down this road of who we hire and how we go about it, because I think, and it's kind of the same situation sometimes when you have, I can remember it was probably previous to 2011. It was probably, when the Cape Cod Commission was first started talking about sewering the Cape. And, then we heard a lot of, no matter what the cost is, we're going to do it. It has to be done. We don't care. And, this type of stuff. And that kind of got a bad rap right from the beginning, and people pushed back. And then there started to be some kind of like public relations going on about it at that time. And then, it was kind of already the horse already out of the barn. So I just want to, I'm just cautioning a little bit that it's not kind of a panacea for everything that's going to.
Yeah, and I'm not necessarily actually advocating for getting an outside agency. I actually do think the message is better from people within the town. I just think that, for one, it'd be really nice for myself, who wasn't around back in 2011, to kind of learn a bit about what were the big objections, like what happened. Were there any groups that were against it? Like, those are definitely the ones we should be targeting first. Maybe just like spending a little bit of time downloading kind of that. And then also, just thinking about like really making it to the town of Yarmouth, thinking more specific to this town.
I think your
I think it's
caution is
funding.
very, very important, and that is to get somebody who knows Yarmouth, is able to develop a consensus within Yarmouth. For somebody to come in from New York City and say that thou shalt do it this way is disaster. we have to get somebody in. I think we have the ability to find someone who could work with us in Yarmouth.
Thank you. I think everybody's right. I recognize in my mind, the need to have some spokesperson, some organization. I recognize that it has to be done with a deft touch or it can be counterproductive. I'm sitting here listening to the discussion, and my father was an engineer, so I'm very sensitive to the engineer and the engineering. But I can't not think of something that's been in the news the last couple of days with regard to General Motors. They've been building some of the best cars they ever built. There's only one problem, they can't sell them. So there goes 5 plants. And we're in a leap of faith here. We've got a sales problem. I was at the 2011 town meeting when it went down. And as I recall, a fair amount of that had to do with the economy at the time. We still hadn't recovered from, if you will, the crash of 2008, 2009. There's a lot of retired people in the town, and a lot of people unsure about the future of their finances. And the lesser evil, I think, for a fair number of people who were on the cusp was no. And I also think it's still the case, but the threat of the heavy hand of litigation kind of backfired. Some people, I think, were almost, I think I can remember somebody saying, so what, let the litigation begin.
Yeah.
So I think, I'm not going to be around for the end of this, far from it. But I think one of the strongest points of advocacy for this is to talk about it as a fundamental betterment for the town. Who knows when it was? 75 years ago, the town built a water system. 100 years ago, electrification. The town's basically at a fork in the road now, and no sewers. The town's going to be delegated to whatever status you get without it, and it's not the right road. So I think neighbor to neighbor is the best way to do this, and I've been doing that in my neighborhood, talking to people. Cost is a very real concern, so at some point, not too far out, we have to be able to say, okay, this is what it's realistically going to cost. This is what it's going to be in terms of your tax bill, whatever methodology we go with. Now, I think when I see the April town meeting, I'd love to see us get this on town meeting, in May rather, and get the discussion started, get another chunk of money and keep the ball rolling. But I also know that without a whole lot of work, almost every day from now till then, that there might be some storm clouds. I can just tell from the reaction of people that I'm talking with about this. It's kind of a shock value. It's well, I don't know what it's going to cost. Well, how can I be in favor of it if I don't know what it's going to cost? It's kind of a standard reaction with people. And, we've got to figure out a way to make those people in the town that are never going to get the pipe realize it's a good thing for them. Because I've had some conversation with my North Shore friends. No pipe? How do you expect me to get interested?
Property value.
All right, but most things take time to sell. And so I would advocate that we find a way to start getting the message out, even if it's piecemeal, because to start the conversation, I don't want to get into too much of a ramble, but the town just went through the Vineyard Wind thing, and there were people on all sides of that. But there was a very active discussion, a lot of participation. Eventually, at least as of now, there's a tentative decision out there. But it's an instruction in terms of community participation, getting the discussion involved on multiple levels. So if we can find the ideal, person to be a spokesperson advocate for this, who's local and understands the various constituencies. I readily agree with the no New York City thought. Well, that would, if you want to end it fast, that's how to do it. So,
Absolutely.
anyway, my 2 cents, folks. Thanks.
Thank you.
have something to say?
Well, after, listening to everybody, and there's a lot of good points being made here, that's for sure. But being in this town a long time, like you, and watching multiple things go down in flames in this town over the years, not just SOAR, but many, many things. And the digging in the heels part, it's very true. We all know there's a few things going on here. First of all, unfortunately, in Yarmouth and a lot of places on the Cape, we did it completely backwards. We built our town, and now we want to put sewers in. Awful, just awful. Second of all is, and I'm going to agree with Remy here, that this, and John too, this has to come from us. This really has to come from us. Because if you go out and you start talking and you start going to these, even the police citizens groups and the crime watch committees, there's a lot of those that are very active, and you're going to get into a place like Captain's Village, where those people vote and they come to town meeting and things like that. And it's going to be very difficult this year because a lot of them are going to be in the water problem. We've got to get out, and I just where I really agree with Tom here is that and what they said, we need to do this yesterday. If we're looking at May town meeting, if we want to hire someone right now, it'd take us 2 months before we even got a firm on the ground. It'd take 2 months going through the Massachusetts General Laws Procurement Act of Chapter 9. So in order to do all that, I think this is something we got to start doing. We got to kind of come to a consensus for ourselves here. If we got to lead this charge, and sure, decisions to the selectmen and money and how much, but we're the ones who are going to have to sell it. Right here, this is the group that's going to end up selling this, one way or the other.
Do we need some guidance in how we sell it?
Well, I think Dave's got a lot of good points. We've got a lot of ammunition. We've got a lot of ammunition to come back on the naysays we get. I mean, I brought pay-as-you-throw to the town once and learned in a hard way of what to say, what not to say. But I think we need to take what they have, and our big thing is doing it legally somehow, so we don't, break any laws here, that we bring this to any group you can get together at the senior center. Very active down there. You go down and you talk to those folks and say, listen, I want to bring something in here on sort of, I want 300 people in here if I can get them. But that's the problem. You're right, if you can get them. But the more we bang it and get it out there and sell it softly, but we need every naysayer we have to have the good answer for. And of course, the big thing is money. What's this going to cost me a year or a month or whatever it is? And there's a lot of information there. I mean, they get it down. So what it's going to cost someone in Harwich, or if they're going to, someone in, what are they paying, Barnstable? They already got sewers in the Hyannis area and everything. So if we can get within a few $100s a year, at least we can say that it's not $2,000 a year. It's $450 to $600 or whatever. So we have something to sell, because it's always going to come down to that question, no matter how much they think we need this for all the great economic reasons and environmental reasons. That's the one that shoots it down. And of course, when we start to go for funding, we got to get it at town meeting, but we must have to get in a vote.
So I was going to offer, Mr. Chairman, I just have been holding back because it's just your third meeting, and and you haven't even decided on some of the things you need to decide on to get all these things that Dave has available to you. But at this point, relating to our agenda item on the timeline, what I was going to suggest was it might be a good time. I'm willing, and I'm sure other staff are as well, but if the committee members want to start meeting with me one-on-one or as a subgroup, I can hold various meetings, get all that feedback, and start developing a marketing plan for you. Because I know many of you probably know people to approach, and some of you might know others, and I can consolidate all that together and put that together as a plan for you guys to start following with your next meeting, having a further discussion too. Because to Rob's point, procurement process is, probably be 2 to 3 months. If it's 2 months that we can procure them and get them, it might be a month before they're available to come out and start. And then they got to get up to speed. And so I'm not sure we'd have any effective outreach from a PR firm by May. If we end up doing a fall town meeting, we'll probably be glad if we did do that procurement and getting someone on board to have them in place for a fall town meeting effort. But regardless of that, what I've heard is I need to start pulling this together for you and coming up with a plan, and I can start scheduling these things and planning these things out and coordinating with Dave and others to get the materials together. That is a more short-term approach and might contribute to the overall longer-term approach as well. So regardless of what you decide on a PR firm, my suggestion would be that perhaps I start doing that outreach one-on-one or as small groups, not a quorum, not additional meetings, but just in the office, maybe.
We can do both.
I think the other thing is we have to, knowing what some of these questions are, have the answers now. We don't.
Right.
We're not there yet.
Good
So
point.
maybe another month, we'll have some better answers. But again, guaranteed that 90% of the questions are gonna come back to money. And we don't have those questions answered. So as much as I want to start now, and maybe what we do as an exercise is send these, whatever you think is a question the public would ask, send it to Rich.
Mhm.
And then we'll start working on answers. And then as we develop the cost recovery, I think that's gonna be the most important part that people are gonna wanna know.
I mean, also, another point I just wanted to emphasize is one of the issues we have as a staff person. I don't mind going to a meeting and doing a presentation and providing factual information. But it's always the issue, and Rob, you alluded to it, of the advocate versus educate. And as a staff person, I got a problem. As an elected official, they can do a lot more than I can do as far as providing their opinion on how you ought to vote on something. But even if we hire a PR firm, we're using public dollars. So we're still in the educate side of the ledger, as opposed to, here's our PR firm advocating for this solution. They can't do that for us. So we gotta be careful about that.
We could form a subcommittee, or if there's a number of people here that want to work on that. My thought was, even if you get an outside firm, a number of people from this committee are going to have to be deeply involved in the process. What I'm thinking is, okay, we've got a lot of nuts and bolts, a lot of things have already been done by our engineers. We have flyers and formats, and they've put together a slideshow and lots of different things. And although we don't have all the tiny little details on that are important, like cost, we're developing a framework here,
Template. Yeah.
a template.
You can get
And
started
all
on the
I'm thinking
template.
about with the PR firm is a company that does this all the time, that have done this before. They can help us organize how we go about it. And you start making lists of groups that we need to approach to put on our dog and pony shows. And we're gonna need the help of our professional engineers here, as well as everybody else's brains that have got some experience in this to pull it off.
Mr. Chairman, you got a motion on the table, but I just would leave it there. Regardless of what you vote on that motion, I'll start that process and outreaching after, this meeting, be at Benef Third, we'll have a little bit more solid direction, and we can start working on some of those things.
Anybody else have any comments on this motion?
Yeah, I can understand being a PR firm on board, but I don't think we're there yet, as Rich mentioned. And stop and think about it. What shot down 2011 was the cost relative to taxes. People were kind of afraid of it. And if you look at the same issue, it'll be real estate taxes. So these viable solutions that we've been talking about, Lee brought up a good point relative to a wastewater fund. We talked a couple of meetings ago about the Yarmouth water rates, quarterly rates, $21, and the actual usage rate, which is tremendously low. That's an untapped resource. Now, I don't know how quickly we can look at that and direct that to the wastewater fund. But I think it's a diamond in the rough right now, and I can't understand why the town hasn't looked at that, even after 2011 failed in preparation for the second go-around relative to wastewater.
Yeah, they could have been putting that money in the bank for the last 6 years.
Yeah, and so I think that's there right now. I mean, $21 4 times a year, and I use a lot of water. I've got a well, but I also use a significant amount of well water. And what I'm paying for water is ridiculously low. And if you look at the impact would be on everyone if you raised it, say, $100 a quarter, or put an additional percentage on the actual usage. And it would be slow and gradual. It's not like someone's getting hit with it, real estate taxes all at once. And getting back to the last issue relative to hiring a PR firm to bring this forward, what does that say about us? We can't do it. We need a PR firm. I can understand. I can look at both sides of the issue, but again, as some of these gentlemen have mentioned already, it's going to be selling the amount that it's going to cost individual taxpayers. That's going to be the key issue. All the other stuff is going to be fluff. People want to know what it's going to cost them.
I agree.
So,
And I think the only danger in us doing this on our own is that we all have to make sure that our message is the same, exactly the same.
absolutely, we'd have to do that anyway.
But we want to make, but there's a difference between one PR firm out there doing it as one, speaking as a group for us. But if we start getting out there as subgroups or individuals, we have to make sure that whatever our message is the same from everybody.
I was under the impression that there was going to be a format that we follow.
Right, and I want to get there too. I want to make sure we're there.
Good.
Okay, so on the motion, all those in favor?
Excuse me, the
Yes, sir.
motion should be restated. I did not use the word, I did not talk about a firm, public relations firm. I did not use that term other than to explain the advice that I felt we necessarily need from a group of people who can generate consensus within the community. So I don't want the motion to even use the word in regard to a firm. So what was the motion that we have? That we investigate?
You asked the town administration to,
In,
that we asked the town administration to hire a firm.
to investigate the hiring of a firm to guide this committee in educating the community. Does that sound all
It's your
right?
motion, so you
Yeah,
tell me.
does that cause any confusion to anyone? Okay. I didn't want it to be confusing, that was all.
Does Jocelyn have it? That's the main thing.
Does what?
Does Jocelyn have it?
We're a minutes taker, yes.
Got
Go ahead.
it.
And it had a second, I believe, so.
All right, were you gonna say something, Tony? Look like you're stopping. Okay. All right. So all those in favor of the motion? For, against? Some people didn't raise their hands.
No, you
Four,
only
it
have
could be
eight
4 to
members
4,
here.
there's only 8
Yeah,
members here.
four.
So we're missing somebody.
Is your ninth member, has he been here? Is he coming?
We're working on that.
Oh, that was Chuck, right? Charlie?
I've reached out on that issue, if I may. I've reached out to the health agent it's the Board of Health rep. And there's not only a primary, but there's an alternate they designated, and neither of them have shown up. But we're working on that.
Okay. All right, so apparently it's a tie vote, so it doesn't pass. But maybe we can revisit this as time moves on.
I mean, one thing that we've done with some other committees is, we've sort of given them the homework assignment every meeting. And I could give you the two homework assignments tonight since you're short and falling behind. One, everybody at the next meeting bring the 5 questions you think need to be answered. And then we aggregate them all. I'm sure we'll combine some and we'll come up with the best 20 that need to go into question and answer period. And we can resend if you don't have in your stack that's been given out before. But one of the Howard's brochures, the back page was a question and answer session. Not saying you need to follow the Howard's questions, but it was put into the brochure so that you answered them. Everybody has the same speech. Everyone has the same answer that you're giving when you go out. So if you all bring your 5 questions to the next meeting, you can do that. Similarly, you all bring, your 5 committees that you feel carry weight at a town meeting that you need to make sure that this committee goes out and addresses and gives the sales pitch or the educational information session to, whatever you want to call it.
Associations.
That's what.
Whatever it is.
Yeah.
And aggregate that list too. And Rich, I don't know whether you've had the ability yet, or I think we discussed at one point, the other communities have actually put an email address so that if a general citizen goes to the website, they can send in a question
And to add to that point, they can also sign up for the email newsletter and.
to get information
The
distributed. Yes.
committee had distributed information that way.
And we had, I'll use the example in Dennis, whenever they sold their beach stickers, we had little forms to fill out. People could give their address or their email address or whatever information they wanted on a sheet, and we would add it. And whenever we developed a brochure or had a handout or anything like that, we emailed that out to all those people who gave us their email addresses. So whenever you're having some event in town that a lot of people that you want to capture come to that event, have those out there, collect them, and we can put them in and create a email distribution network to send information out to. So there's a lot of little things that you folks know the town the best, that we can help, just start guiding you on that.
I think those are great suggestions. I like the idea of heading towards maybe a subcommittee on outreach, and maybe you end up with a subcommittee on finance, and maybe you end up with a subcommittee on planning, and that way it's a little bit more flexible in terms of workload. And the smaller groups can get together outside of, a publicized meeting, and then you can bring back your results to this group. And before anything moves forward, this group deliberates on it. In addition to Dave's things, I think that if anybody has just generally any other ideas relative to the outreach, I live in Sandwich. I know Sandwich did the little YouTube videos.
Mhm.
I don't know who, I think it was the health director who's kind of starred in the videos, but I don't know who kind of directed them and or if they had anybody helping them along. Maybe you do know, Dave. But I think any of those other
We'll find
ideas
out.
to Rich, and then
We
we can start to put it
do
together.
short snippets in-house, and we could partner up with the Cape Media Center. I've already talked to them about having them come out and help us doing videos.
Okay. And then we have the other thing we have on the website already is notify me. We have that capacity. So I think that one idea is what information, we don't have all the answers because we don't have the cost information, certainly. But you can start thinking about what information can we share right now to start kind of whetting people's appetite. and letting them know this is all
Let them
going
ask
on.
questions too.
Right, I think that's a super idea. I have to run.
Thank you.
Okay.
You do have the final draft of the economic report, and so I can draft up the takeaways out of that. That could be a piece we send out to start the ball rolling.
That could be a 5 to 10 minute cable presentation, just give an overview of that, what they went through and the findings of that. You know, why did you undertake it?
How about a
And then
pizza-
post it on the website so that you can direct people to go if they want to read it in detail.
how about a pizza night at the senior center for a presentation? Get people on board.
So-
Think outside the box.
It's a good idea.
Do we have any funds available?
Well, I think we have funds to support outreach, as I mentioned before. We just have to determine what's legal with those funds.
What falls in that category?
Okay. So that maybe as well as the questions at next meeting, let's bring up different groups that we should reach out to, like, you know, the neighborhood associations,
Part of our
senior
homework.
center, right. But if we actually bring them in, put them in writing, and then we could cull those out and see what's the best, what we think the best impact is to spend our time. Rotary. Yeah, Rotary's. It's a funny group because, not that it's a bad idea, but there's a lot of people who don't live in Yarmouth or Dennis,
Yeah.
or some don't, so they may not care. But
But they live in another Cape Town.
Yeah, what I would suggest is have people generate the list and then you can go through and cull through what, or prioritize them. Because if you come up with 100, you're not going to get to all 100. But, you know, at this point, put them all on the listing and then you can go through and prioritize later.
right. Okay, so I think we've got through that. Review draft phasing.
I think you've seen this plan before as well. The light green shows the phase one plan that had been generated previously, which goes essentially Route 28 from on the left-hand side, the Barnstable line, to the right-hand side over to the Bass River Bridge. One of the things that we have prepared some cost and flow data on. So just to refresh your memory, it's this Route 28 stretch coming up here. Previously, two in the phase one plan that we had generated and some costs. We actually picked up Old Main Street because this is lower in elevation than the Route 28 portion. So actually the flows up here split and come down Old Main to the main pumping station over here. So as part of the phase one, if you're gonna build this, you really need to build portions of Old Main Street if you're gonna keep with gravity sewer system. So we've included that in the cost, but also there was a request to pick up South Shore Drive. The original layout for this, because again, this is sort of the high point. This went this way and that went that way to pumping stations. So that would pump that area up and that would pump there. But in reality, if you look at the phasing plan, you know, this is until phase 5. So if the goal is actually to pick up the folks along South Shore Drive, because they're your higher water users, bigger users, this could be a little package pumping station that picks up these areas and pumps over here, and that can pick up that area and then pump up. Instead of sizing this to pick up all that area at this point. So there's things that could be done. We've included the cost. So either one, and we can make that decision final when you get into a final design phase. But those are little things that, you know, we can think about. Similarly, this was the effluent recharge site. If it's your in-town solution, it's a treatment plant and effluent recharge here initially, with secondary recharge over here at the Bass River Golf Course. We would need to think about, if you're doing the in-town solution for this phase, treating, recharging here, we would need to sewer some more in here to remove enough nitrogen because we're adding nitrogen in that effluent that's coming from other watersheds. So that was part of the original phase back in 2011. We were sewering some of this so that's an equal nitrogen balance. So that would need to be considered. But if you're part of DHY and this is all going over to Dennis, you don't need to do that. The decision you need to make, and we don't know the answer today as we sit here, is if your partner to the left, to the west, Barnstable comes over and uses that and starts recharging effluent there. At what point would they be doing that? Probably not until you're into phase 2, which this was the phase 2 area, meaning 5 years after you've built that, because they got to build a lot of infrastructure to come over here and use that anyway. So again, I don't think that needs to be part of phase 1, but it should be flagged as probably as your phase 2 in order to address that nitrogen issue. So again, you heard us say last meeting, you should really focus on the first 3 phases, because who knows, by the time you get to 7 and 8, a lot of things may change. Hopefully we can get the opening of the Bass River Route 6 bridge widened and improve water quality up there. So hopefully some of this area will shrink. Other priorities may come about. You know, there's an active area here. Maybe this goes to Barnstable as part of that effluent coming back here. So that would be taken care of. So then you're into phase 2 here. You need to consider whether that becomes part of phase 2 and then this area, and this becomes phase 3. So there's a little things like that. But we've generated costs based on these components as defined here now. And that's what we'll show you in a minute. They're all still being checked. So this is all preliminary, but we wanted to give you some ballpark numbers to start to think about when you're looking at starting your cost recovery phase of how many millions do I need? Because, you know, that's a big chunk right there, because it's all the bigger pipe in the whole system, and you're on a Mass Department of Transportation highway road. So that comes with other construction requirements. But again, if you can time some of that, maybe we don't have to do all the final paving because they're going to come along in so many years if you're ahead of them. If you can time in with a project, they'll put the pipe in and you let them do the rest. So there's different things that go along with this that we do need to consider. You know, and then again, we picked this area up here. So wanted to get that out, get your thoughts back. Can you flip to the next one, Karen? This talks about the flows. You know, if you're doing your own treatment plant, or actually even if you're part of the DHY, you know, this is the amount of flow coming in the first 3 to 4 phases. And again, that's what I would suggest you focus on. But that's about, you know, if you're building a 3.1, 3.2 million gallon a day treatment plant for Yarmouth only, you're probably going to build about half of that in your initial construction. So that gets you essentially your first 4 phases. And then you'd be able to make decisions down the road. If you build the DHY, again, that's about half. So that's right in that same ballpark. And this shows a cost update by major component. Collection system. Treatment plant initially, it's not, you know, you cut the cost in half because you've got the buildings, the common spaces, upfront treatment, and all those things. So you're really adding tankage, additional treatment capacity and tankage later on because you've built the common areas up front. So that's why it's not a 50-50 split of cost. And then the effluent recharge, where you ultimately build that. And then we've thrown in or added the non-traditional, you know, there's some aquaculture, there's addressing fertilizer management, and some other components. Did I count that? Is this my board? What happened?
No, it's something to do with the system itself.
Yeah.
I don't think it's you.
I wasn't that talented.
No.
So the other thing I want to point out is we've bringing all the costs up to 2022. which is anticipated, as we sit here today, to be the midpoint of the first phase of construction. So that's when you would be building this, roughly June 2022 will be your first construction phase.
Dave, is that treatment facility estimate, is that Yarmouth plant?
This is all Yarmouth
All of
only.
this is
And
Yarmouth
so
only.
presumably it might be a little bit less with the DHY.
Yes, yes, these costs, theoretically, your savings is in these two columns right here. So by joining DHY, you're gonna build this on your own anyway. It may change a little bit configuration wise and what have you, but the two cost saving columns here are with DHY. Because DHY is doing treatment and effluent recharge. And so economy of scale, you're about half the flow. That's where you're gonna save your money versus doing it on your own. It's a big nugget. No two ways about it. But this is the cost that then when we do the DHY cost splits now that we've updated this, we've had the components for Dennis. We recently completed Harwich. Now we have this ballpark. We're again checking it. Willow came off of Kara's computer on the way here. But I think this puts you in the ballpark. You know, if you're looking to build phase one, you know, you're looking at a little over $100 million. 2011, you were looking for $55 million. But you're only doing half of Route 28. So a lot has changed since 2011, but you know, that's when you start your cost recovery plan, that's what you're first looking at as your ask going to town meeting.
I feel like that number should not be readily publicized. I mean, not in our like general marketing outreach, because like you see a number like that and people are like, but like the average cost to people really isn't that great. So
It's
Well-
cheaper than a school.
yeah.
I think we said,
It's still like-
There you go.
I think
Maybe.
two lessons learned from experience. Don't focus on that number. Because that's in 2022's cost, and obviously that number's gonna be different because 3% increase, and some people have argued when we're saying we're using 3% increase to go up on an annual basis. You know, it's not gonna be that number, but everything else changes too, people's salaries and this and that. That's why we use today's cost, and we don't get into escalating everything else. These are really the numbers you wanna focus on. We, I think, gave you at the last meeting, or was in your handout, the finances that came back from Dennis. You showed the charts for the three components that they were using. Refresh your memory, they're using a portion of their solar account. They're raising their rooms tax from 4% to 6%, which you're already up at 6%, so they're gaining that 2%. And then they intend to do the water infrastructure investment fund as well. And their proposal is to take the 3% CPA down to 1.5 and 1.5 split. Unlike Sandwich, which brought it down to 2% and then added 2%. So they actually went from 3 to 4 total. And then they put the rest on the tax rate. And they showed what the impact to the tax rate was from those three components and then implementing all three. And we had one of the members of the finance committee on the subgroup that helped develop that plan. And I still remember his look on his face at that time when we got those numbers back from their financial advisor who created the graphs. You know, they did the debt coming off, the debt coming on from the wastewater program and this and that, and they laid it out over the 40-year period, but then goes out to 70 years actually, because it's a 30-year bond. But they laid out all that cost and what the impacts to the tax rate was if you adopted just solar, if you adopted solar and rooms tax, and then if you adopted solar, room tax, and water infrastructure investment fund, which is the one they ultimately recommended. And based on that, to do the first phase program, it was a $350 increase in taxes on an annual basis on an assessed value home of $350,000. And he looked at me and goes, I thought it was thousands. I said, no. And then if you looked at the full 70-year program, for their full 200+ million, the big number, the average or the max rate, which was, I think, 35 years out, was $540. And that only happened 3 years. All the others was down closer to the $350 for that. So you look at me and goes, that's only $1,000. So I'm doing the math, figure out, oh, I know what else you would. But, you know, again, it was a mindset. Until you have the numbers that you can educate the people in front of you, which is the steps we're getting to. People have this perception that, yes, it's $10,000, $20,000 a year and I can't afford it. So that's the education process that we're going to go through with you folks, that then you're going to take, and we have to explain that to the public. Because I'm sure as you, John, as you talk to your neighbors, they've got this big number in their mind. I would also say it was sort of a lead in to your discussion to cost recovery, and maybe this is something you want to facilitate at tonight's meeting, because it worked out well. What they did is their wastewater implementation committee came up with 3 tenets, and then they formed a subgroup to actually develop the program. But the 3 tenets that the wastewater implementation committee came up with were: 1, that the cost should be shared by everyone in town, because the problem is created by everyone in town. Whether you're going to be connected to a sewer or not, you're part of the problem. Whether you go to the restaurant down the street that's going to be on the sewer and you live on the north side, or you live 3 miles inland and you're not right on the water, but you're still putting the same amount of nitrogen in the groundwater table or not. So that was number 1. Number 2, they wanted to make sure that they developed plans that created funds that would help, stabilization type funds, that would help build a pot of money to help pay versus always having to go to town meeting and asking for money. And 3, they wanted a component that reflected those who used a lot more water than, the little old lady who lives in the Cape house by herself, type of thing. So they wanted some cost component reflected on the amount of water/wastewater that you generate. So those were the 3 things that then they gave the charge to that subgroup. Now, you may develop 3 different things. I just want to use that as an example of that was the guiding principles that they then gave the challenge to that subgroup to come back with a cost recovery plan to use. They didn't just say, no taxes or no this and that. They came up with 3 sort of goals, tenets that were guiding that subgroup as to how to then look at all the options to come back and try and meet those. So, do we have others? Yeah, that just summarizes what we talked about. $60 million for the treatment plant, which hopefully will come down if you do DHY. Effluent recharge and PRB, proactive barrier, that helps reduce the nitrogen in the groundwater. It's a carbon wire. If the nitrogen travels through, it goes through a chemical reaction known as denitrification. And then to add in that South Shore Drive area, rough estimate, a little over $4 million. You asked us to add that in as sort of a 1B versus just adding it to the Route 28 section. We talked a little bit about the area below Buck Island Road, depending on when any effluent would be applied to that site. When that is, we need to make sure we offset that nitrogen. And then we would need to factor in some piping on Old Main Street in order to consider the layout that had been done from a gravity sewer pipe network.
So the next slides lead into Rich map.
These are the ones Rich had sent out, which I think we looked at.
Yeah.
When you had the in-town meeting going on, and then the next one I think showed,
The second one.
yeah, which is what we're talking about. The question here is what we're been showing is we would collect here and then pump with a force main up here, so these houses wouldn't actually be connected, but that could change, but, because it's not like this is the high point and runs down here. It's all, as you all know, very flat right there.
So part of the discussion at the last meeting, if we go back to the other map, and if we wanted to, I could really bring up a GIS map and put it on the screen. We could look at it in detail. But this was the abutters to Route 28. And so these were all the parcels that in phase one we thought would connect. And the question would be, is there anything, Dave brought up the North Main, Old North Main. Are there any other areas or other near adjacent parcels that ought to be included? The problem with that is if you start one-offing one by one, I imagine you might have some sort of issue with why him but not me type of thing. So it's more of probably not a one-off approach. It's probably more of a neighborhood approach. I would imagine.
Yeah, that's why the old main does make sense, because it feeds to your main pumping station that would be down there. But I agree with you. Once you start saying, well, let's do this neighborhood or connect this or this or that, that's when you do get into those. You need some guiding policy.
I guess the only thing that came up from the last effort, and I think I heard at the last meeting, would be this south and southeast of Swan Pond there. There's a couple big parcels. I don't think the Stop and Shop is included. I don't think Swan Pond Village is included.
Stop and Shop probably should be included.
So perhaps we would modify this to do those. I don't think that's a huge add-on.
One of the things that Karen, I think, mentioned was you could show your commercial overlay district or something, which would probably pick that up
Yes.
in that area.
Your B2 district, but I'm not sure.
That's within the VCOD.
Oh, yeah, it is. But your underlying zoning would be the B2.
The parts that aren't shaded just south of Swan Pond, up by the intersection of Long Pond, are those wetlands? Or hasn't that been delineated?
No, that's Swan Pond Village and Stop and Shop.
There is some area that we had
No, back,
noted as
it'd be
potential wetland
not
area.
there, be back here, which is part of, some of this is part
Oh.
of Louis Canello's idea.
Yeah.
I know some of it's wetland, but I don't know how much that would be included in what he might be planning, so
There
from
are
a
a
flow
couple
perspective, I
places,
think you'd
yeah.
probably want to consider what might happen there.
But they don't have access though, so
It's his land, so,
the connection
well,
would be
Through other properties.
through other properties, but he's talked about putting several properties together that are presently owned by different people. So I think that might be a consideration. It might be worth a conversation with him, I don't know, but.
Yeah, didn't he come up with a master plan? We're connecting all those, I think, at one time.
Yeah.
Yeah, he was putting a road in that back area to connect it all.
Right.
But I
something
mean,
to
those would
think
just be
about.
served to the connection up at the front parcel, though, is my point, though. I mean, whether he consolidated them or not, they're all gonna be
Right.
served to that one that is already providing for it, so.
Right,
don't need
I'm
to
just
do
thinking
anything.
from an engineering standpoint, you want to make sure it's sized properly.
Sure.
So I think what we're talking about is just those two parcels just to the right of that.
Mhm.
Maybe add those in.
Yeah.
But Dave, I guess my question would be, how the heck would you add those in without going up Long Pond Road? Or not, what road is that?
One Pond Drive.
Long Pond Road,
Is it?
yeah.
A few
Well,
of
if you're
those
picking
are
at Stop and
included.
Shop in Swan Pond Village, you're gonna be there anyways. Generally, otherwise, I think whatever happens in those, I see 3 parcels there, could probably flow through the properties at the front.
Wasn't Stop and Shop where it says long?
Yeah.
Yeah,
Some of those parcels are included in the phase 4 in the GIS plan, the multicolored map.
Mhm.
Yeah.
So they may not be direct abutters, but they were included in the overall plan. So if any should be shifted over.
well, I just think from a development perspective.
Also, like, let's see.
It's probably our best prospect to get something going on the development side with what he's doing.
Yeah.
He's actually talked about creating his own mini sewer system if the town doesn't get going, so that we
Okay.
can,
So we should definitely.
That's what
keep
I
that
think he
then.
was generating that.
because at the very least, I think
Master
it's
plan
worth a
with that road.
conversation with him to see what
Okay.
if he has any
I guess
flows flow ideas, his plans. I would think he'd have to have that by now.
Guess what I was alluding to is, I misspoke, I said Long Pond Road, Forest Road. Wouldn't we have to go up Forest Road to pick up Swan Pond Village?
It's
I
possible.
would think so.
Unless they get an easement through.
No, that's not Forest Road.
Oh, no,
No,
no.
that's Long Pond Drive.
Yeah, it's
Swan
Long Pond Drive.
has frontage on Long Pond Drive too.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I
There's
think
a driveway right in
Long
from there.
Yeah,
you wouldn't have to go that far.
So for a phase one, you probably want to include just those two parcels to round this out, that area. Is that the,
Sorry, confusion.
Which are picked up in 4.
Right.
They're in 4
Yeah.
now.
Right.
And that goes up Long Pond.
And that little area would be simple to add in.
Right, so you're looking at
Yeah, that should be
right there.
town of the own water department.
That water tank, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. I think it's trying to move it.
No doubt.
Okay, will we cover other phases? Donna?
Yeah, again, we've come back with what we thought we heard you say last meeting for phase one, so we wanted to confirm that with you tonight. I think other than a couple tweaks that we just talked about. And we will add in, well, I guess the question is, do you want us to add in South Shore Drive to that, or,
I think it makes
I would-
sense.
Yeah.
Makes a lot of sense.
okay?
I do.
I agree.
And we'll do that, at least my recommendation is to do it with that smaller pumping station on the east end versus the larger one at this point.
Right.
And instead of doing 2 force mains, just do 1, and we do a force main versus gravity connection down. So we'll add those.
To connect gravity along South Shore, which
Yes.
is straight to the pump
Correct.
station, right?
Just to get back up to phase one, it would have to be through the forest.
Sure.
And you think that could be added in for $4 million? Did I read that correctly?
We need to look at that pumping station layouts and stuff, but yes, we'll, as I said, we're triple checking all these costs at this point, but yes.
But Dave, couple questions. Coming down Freeview Avenue, you're not gonna pick up any of the residential, you got enforcement in?
That was the question I just asked.
Oh.
And right now I'm hearing that we'll stay with the force main and not put any sewers in that road.
I feel like the bigger priority is South Shore Drive, significantly so. I mean, it's a lot of cottages along Seaview. I don't think there's as much urgency.
I think that's your bigger ratepayers.
Yeah.
Before,
Yeah, I think
you
some
just patch the road and,
before you made a
That's
decision,
okay.
I think you should have the alternative of force main and/or hooking up the houses on any street that you're gonna dig up, because at the end of the day, this is gonna turn out to be about votes. And it's gonna be a little bit harder to sell the idea that, oh yeah, I'm gonna dig up in front of my house, but you're not getting the sewer.
I would tell you, it's a lot easier to put a pressure pipe in off the side of the road than it is to go in deep groundwater, fine sands, in the middle of the road that would totally tear the road up.
Okay. But I'm just.
I understand what you're saying, but yes,
We
we can take another look at that.
We need to be able to explain to people, because not everybody's gonna sit down and have the kind of deep discussions we're having in this room, over many nights.
It'd be
I think
nice to know
that-
the cost difference between
Yeah.
actually sewering those and then not.
Sure.
I think the base, just off the cuff here, because we've had this discussion before in years past, was the reason you might do that. You're getting to the high volume water and sewer users on South Shore Drive, which will help finance phase one, which will make it affordable for you to get on board in a subsequent phase. Like, yeah, they're not gonna like not being a hook up to a pipe going by their house, but they might also appreciate the fact that there's not a $5,000+ hookup
I-
charge. So,
I recognize, I'm just trying to verbalize what I think might be an issue for some.
No, we need the answer
We
to
can
that
have
question.
yeah.
Yes.
Another thing too, the Davenport companies are working with a 20-year window. Remember that, Kurt, relative to the relief they got from the Cape Cod Commission? Replacing their, all of their hotels in the event of a severe storm that wiped them out.
Right.
And I think he's probably got, what, 10 or 12 years left?
I was gonna say 13, but
Okay.
in that range somewhere, yeah.
So I think this would definitely fit into his long-range plans. And you might see him just going forward with this when it's available.
Yeah, and I think one of the reasons that area had been considered previously too was, and I forget which ones it is, but I believe there's a couple of establishments down there that have escrow accounts with DEP, meaning they should have been putting in treatment plants, but because it was being considered as part of the comprehensive wastewater management plan for being sued in the early phase, they let them put a certain amount of money in a bank account to be used to connect into the sewer when it came by versus using that money to build a treatment system now.
And I believe that when we looked at it at the planning board, base flood elevation at Smugglers was about 4 foot. And then as you went to the west up towards Red Jacket, it climbed up to 12, 13 feet. So, I think it would be practical, and I think he would really take advantage of it. One of the things, how about Barnstable? Where are we staying with Barnstable in regards to their intentions and our intentions with them? Are we talking to them on a regular basis?
The short answer is yes. Well, that's part of the study that CDM Smith is doing.
Yeah.
It's going to give us options and costs associated with connecting. So I think in a very short time frame, that
Okay.
draft will be able to be discussed with this committee.
We had a meeting a couple weeks ago and we revised the routes that we were considering going over. So now we're redoing those costs to consider those rerouting.
But they're amenable to
Options.
everything that we're bringing forward?
Yeah, they're definitely supportive. In this particular go round of the discussions, it's definitely a win-win
Good.
arrangement. So there's some huge benefits for them as well as for Yarmouth.
Great, thank you.
The thing that wasn't on the table back in 2010, when those discussions last took place, was Yarmouth willing to accept Barnstable effluent back at Buck Island Road because you needed that site for your own effluent recharge. If you do your own in-town solution, you will need that site for your own effluent recharge. If you go with the DHY Clean Waters Community Partnership, you won't need that site, and that becomes an asset for you to essentially sell to Barnstable.
Absolutely.
So that's what's on the table now, which is why they're very interested.
So you're working the numbers out for both
Yes.
alternatives, right? Okay. And when did you say you have these numbers?
Barnstable won't probably be till the January timeframe. We're working now to have in middle December refinement of yours and the first pass at the DHY
Okay.
breakdown.
Right now, it feels to me like the arrangement with the three towns is more likely alternative.
We hope.
Well, if you look at how much money the towns are gonna save, I mean, unless there's a big breakdown, you know, and if they're all in agreement, that the agreement looks good.
The way for them to save money is to do it, but I'm not hedging any bets.
Yeah. People don't always make logical decisions.
I thought that was a done deal, but no, I mean, there's still a cloudy area here.
Well, it has to be voted on.
As we voted on, it's always a cloudy area.
Until the ink is dried on the bottom line agreement after town meeting,
Anything could happen.
anything could happen.
Well, when,
We might know better on December 5th.
right,
Or 120 days after.
but when we present this to the town in our public relations program here, the numbers are gonna should show.
You heard us say when we were first challenged, because we worked for all three towns, how could they save money? We put forth the option of doing one treatment plant instead of three and sharing your effluent recharge sites. You're gonna have to build your own collection systems no matter what.
Okay.
So sharing, basic economy of scale, that's how you're gonna save money.
Okay.
Is doing that enough to overcome the other issues out there floating around? That's gonna be up to the towns. I can't answer that. But I'm sure your selectmen are gonna wanna hear from you as the committee that, they put forth to come up with your recommended program, and they'll be looking for your input.
I just have one other question, Dave. There's been some mention of using the overlay commercial district on this map. You haven't done that yet? On property served in phase one?
No, what's shown up there is abutting lots.
So meaning, are there any other properties that are
Right.
not included that
No,
should be included?
They're all in the, I believe they're all in the butters. Right?
All the commercial is in?
All the overlay districts are within the existing properties shown on these. I think it was about figuring out the flow with the potential development within those
Four
areas.
village centers.
Right.
Because you've got those back parcels that,
Yep.
that can be developed.
So we're not gonna leave anybody out based on what we have here for phase one.
We worked on this with the planning board.
I think the discussion was
We were very,
was around the SRF funding.
Yeah.
That we get the numbers right so that we qualify for the SRF. We don't want to jeopardize that if we can help it.
we also want to encourage smaller lots on 28 within these village centers to have the ability to buy from their abutters, left and right, east and west.
Okay.
And increase the size of the lot. It may take 3 or 4 different parcels, depending on a developer's intention, but we created an opportunity so they could do that.
Right.
Change the front setback, side setback.
I just, putting the phase one forward, and trying to explain to people and so forth.
Absolutely.
We wouldn't want somebody to come up and say, well, there's a commercial piece over here, and you're not including it.
That's what's going to create tax relief.
Yeah, absolutely.
The problem you have with if it's an overlay district that is beyond the abutters, again, if it's just a parcel that's behind one that's butts, how are you gonna get there? And if you're gonna go up that street, it's hard to just go up, 50 feet and then stop. Usually you're gonna do a whole neighborhood or a whole street at a time.
But I don't think there's any of the overlay districts extend beyond those lots in their frontage on 28.
I don't think so.
Yeah, it's Canello's sports world there.
Well, I think it's the back parcels of that.
Yeah. It
That
goes way
are-
back.
It's connected and you can get through it through 28, but the back parcels aren't listed, but they could be economic development where they could be.
So I'll make sure, I'll get
developing
together with Karen and
that.
look at these overlay districts on this map. And we'll get that and verify that.
Because it's not, those back parcels aren't under the commercial underlying zoning district of the B2, they're in the overlay village center district.
Well, he is looking for a GIZ to make that happen too. Go ahead.
There was a lot that it wasn't on 28, let's say it was one lot back, and the property owner was able to partner with the property owner that did abut 28 and wanted to pick up the 100% of the cost to hook up. Would we let them in on phase one?
It's possible, but anything beyond those front lots are not business-owned land generally. It's almost,
I'm trying to address the, one of situation. If just something we don't see tonight, I'm just trying to reach the.
the only way I would see that happening is through a Board of Appeals action. And even then, I kind of doubt that the neighborhoods are going to encourage one of their neighbors to convert their property back to a commercial.
Those lots in general are relatively shallow.
That's the problem with the redevelopment of 28.
Mhm.
I mean, one of the places I see that may be feasible, but I'm not sure because of the water table is next to the Irish Village. So it's Blisscott and those roads in there, Angus. you know, there's small residential areas, but I could conceivably see those becoming commercial.
Sure.
If somebody's got the money to buy them up.
Yeah.
But other than that, I'm not sure there's any examples of where that would probably work. At least not from my experience with what we've done zoning wise.
There's a lot of opportunities for these developers. Every time we send them RFPs, we try to get a lot of folks in Boston area interested in what we're doing. But I think this is gonna be the frosting on the cake when we give them the opportunity to have good development schools.
It's conceivable that you may have development happening as we're constructing the stores, and they'll be ready to tie in when it goes live.
Well, you look at Dakota Partners. You know, they've got their own system there that for the 69 units, affordable housing. And they're gonna be putting a pipe right to the
Street.
the road,
Yeah.
wherever the hookup is, so they can tie in when it goes by.
Yeah, I think, didn't the Hampton Inn do the same thing
Yeah.
from their septic system?
And then in West Yarmouth Gardens, 40 units, they're looking to do the same thing as well.
Yeah.
Having their own package plant.
And I have a sense that the property next to Hampton Inn, had we had sewers in the ground, would already be developed.
Yeah.
I think he went other places because
Condominium, yeah.
he had opportunities in other towns that had sewers, and that's where he's spending his money right now. Again, I think there's a lot of potential there. And I know there's many cases that aren't public, and I'm not gonna make them public, of people who come to town looking to do development or redevelopment and walked away because of the lack of sewers. They don't wanna be in that business.
No, it's very expensive and time consuming to get it going with this one.
Okay.
One other question, Dave. There's this residential area down here. Between South Shore and 28. It's
It's not in the
it's
base.
we're not gonna sewer that area?
It drains to
Nantucket Sound.
Nantucket Sound, so it's not a priority because it doesn't drain into the watersheds that are too much nitrogen.
Good memory.
Doing our job. You talking this area right here, Clete? Yes.
I have a
That was
watershed
originally
map.
part of the plan back in 2011. But as depicted on here, it's right here.
Right,
And that flows directly out to Nantucket Sound.
right.
It's not one of the estuaries, so this is not nitrogen sensitive. The estuaries are nitrogen sensitive. So to meet the regulatory requirement of what's known as a TMDL, total maximum daily load, the DEP is now issued for Lewis Bay, Parkers River, and Bass River, which the town now has to meet. You have to remove a certain amount of nitrogen in each of these watersheds. So these are higher priorities than doing this area. So back 5-6 years ago, the town asked us to keep the cost, that 367 million number down. These areas fell out. But I think I also pointed out that if you look at the Dennis plan, it's similar. Over in here, this between the Swan Pond River watershed. There we go. That's why I need Kara. These areas right in here, they all flow directly out too. So they decided to do sort of their South Shore Drive type area, but not the small little cottage areas, but yet they've given us the directive of come up with 8 phases to meet our nitrogen removal and our smart growth area. But also make sure that you make sure it's expandable in the future after we do our 8 phases to come back and pick this area up and this area up.
Huh.
My guess is that would happen the same thing in Yarmouth. Because once you start putting those pipes in the ground and people are connecting and doing away with their mounded septic system that takes up their whole yard and this and that, you're gonna wanna say, sign me up. Just look at Provincetown, Commercial Street. They did checkerboard sewering, meaning they went and asked everybody who wanted to connect. 2/3 of the people said yes, 1/3 of the people said no. And those 1/3 have all come back and said, let me in after they built it. And now they're expanding the system beyond what was the general.
Right.
And they spent years trying to minimize that sewer system.
So I guess the reason I'm asking the question is, I mean, if people live there and they're saying, hey, you're not gonna provide for me?
It's a lot of vacation rentals there.
Very, very seasonal there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah,
And even him,
But still,
not completely.
it is,
but a lot.
but
You gotta, I mean,
not in the current 8 phases we have,
Right.
but
eventually.
make the
They could be
provision.
9.
yeah, exactly. Who knows? Things change.
I mean, people may come to town and say, I wanna build an expansion, and buy 3 properties. and
Oh,
knock
here's
them
hoping
down.
not.
Okay, cost recovery. My favorite topic.
I put in your handout a presentation we did in 2016. As it turns out, it's $370 million we're talking about, so you're right on the money, Dave. And then I have a cover page, which we'll get to in a second, but I'll just walk you through this real quick. This was the 2016 presentation. I carved out just the financial piece out of this. There was a whole presentation about the whole program. And my piece was how do we come up with 370 million? And so we talked about the existing water infrastructure, $250 million over 75 years, all within an affordable rate structure that hasn't gone up in over 20 years at this point. Here was the direction we were given at the time. Didn't want a general property tax impact. Didn't want betterments, didn't want connection fees. Wanted affordable utility rates, which I think came out to be, we determined it was like around $600 plus or minus per month, year, I mean.
A year.
And a fairness of cost distribution, so kind of David's 3 tenets that he spoke about. You know, everybody's participating. If you're participating a lot more than somebody else, then you might participate at a higher level. We even broke it out to, this goes to that real estate transfer tax idea. If you contributed to the problem over the last 30 years, 50 years, or however long you've lived here, and now you're thinking you're going to move away and not contribute to the solution, you know, we caught you in that through the transfer tax idea. So that was part of the fairness of cost distribution as well. So we started at what did it look like? We had a series of graphs. What's $370 million look like? And what it looked like in the year 2048 was the peak of all the costs, coming in at $7.9 million of debt service per year, which on a $325,000 home was $469 per year.
That was in 2048,
Yes.
that peak?
Well, in today's
I mean,
dollars, so,
right,
Year 2040.
Yeah.
Yeah.
but the 469 applied to that year.
yes. You're testing my memory now. It's been a couple of years. I think that was the case.
Yes.
Better get used to it, we're doing this again.
So then what we started to do was, well, before we made things better, we made it worse. So in Dave's 367, David, I don't think that included connection costs.
No.
And part of the program presented in 2016 was we wanted to alleviate that burden from the homeowner and that complication and make it as simple as possible to connect. So the program was going to take on all the connection costs.
Would that be a prevailing rate?
It would be, yeah.
Well, then it's- then
So it
I
might
think
not
it's
be a
gonna
good-
deal.
But that's what we decided, you know, that's what we talked about back then. And that brought it up to from 370 to $427 million. So the peak was still 2048, and it was $8.9 million, a $529 a year impact. Then we looked at how could we make it better? And so we talked about regional options, road resurfacing, funding, alternative procurement methods, grant opportunities. And really what it boils down to is how did any of that impact the costs in these graphs here? So there was a concept that if we hosted a plant here in town, that we could generate some host fees. And those host fees brought our cost down to $305 million. So we went from the $8.9 million peak down to now $7.1 million in 2048. And if we garnered some savings from road construction that was foregone and we utilize that money towards this project, we could bring that down to $252 million total with a peak of $6.4 million. Next graph is slide 21. Here we introduced all those other things, but we had this funding item of it says capital forgiveness, but I think that was a 25% surcharge on a user rate. So if your user fees need to be X amount of dollars to cover operating costs, add 25% to that as a capital recovery charge. And that brought it down to $230 million total with a peak of $5.6 million. So I'm going to skip ahead, and there's a slide here that kind of shows a menu of options. And this kind of summarized that last slide on 21, which showed the $230 million total at a peak of $5.6 million. How would you do that? And back a couple years ago, we had projected out that based on the debt that we had in the books at the time, every time some of that debt, most of our debt was declining. The debt payment, the debt service was a little bit less each year out. So every time that went down, we were going to steward that savings and capture it and set it aside. And we did do that for a couple of years until last year. And we used it to mitigate the impact of the DUI Regional School District override. So instead of a $1 million plus override last year, we had a $500,000 override last year. Because that money, that debt drop off we had been stewarding that was projected to be $2 million by the time we got to 2024. So that's not there anymore. The good news is if we do get all these new schools and all these other things, we'll have new debt and that'll drop off. You start stewarding that debt.
In the future.
Yeah.
But we'll have to wait, a month or so to see how that plays out. So that $2 million, unfortunately, at the moment is off the table, by and large. The $500,000, it's small dollars, but we thought we could, by consolidating with the septic plant and utilizing some surpluses there and some ability to raise revenues there, that we could generate $500,000 through that. We projected out, build out that we'd be generating $3 million a year as a 25% add-on to the user fees for operating costs. We had talked about at the time, this wastewater infrastructure fund existed a couple of years ago. It had just come out at that point. And if we had repurposed 1.5% from CPA and added it to the wastewater infrastructure fund, that would be $1.5 million. And if we did this real estate transfer tax idea, which currently would need special legislation and we'd have to push through the legislature and get town meeting to approve, a 1% transfer tax on the sale of a house. So going to the concept of you contributed to the problem for many years, and now you're going to leave before you have to pay for it. This is how we were going to capture that equity issue. That 1% transfer tax, when we projected it out, was about $1.5 million per year. Nothing under betterments, because that was the charge. We didn't want to do betterments. So here was the top line here on slide 25, showed the funding requirement with the impact of $3.5 million at the peak. And the red showed the application of that $2 million of debt drop-off as it ramped up over the years. And see, obviously, the color piece there doesn't quite fill the whole chart, so we're short. but we're building on this now. So that was just the drop off. Then the next one, which is on 26, has a little bit of green. Now we added the drop off plus that 500,000 from the septic plant. That wasn't a lot of money, but it was important to your earlier point. We're getting it sooner. We can build it up and use it in the beginning. Slide 27 shows depth drop off, the septic plant, and now we're adding the 25% surcharge from user fees. And I forget what date, we must have assumed a 2022 implementation date. This was a couple years ago. So obviously this would have to be updated for new timelines. But the purple shows how that funding, and it's more than enough when you go out past many years, but in the beginning years, we're still short. We still got some white space between that black line and all the funding sources adding up. But then we add the 1.5% infrastructure fund from CPA. That's the blue. Now we're getting closer. And the differential between our total funding and our total cost is now $1.2 million in 2048. Still didn't meet the charge of what we were given to do. But finally, when you add this final slide, so this is the debt drop off, the septic money, 25% surcharge on operating fees, 1.5% water infrastructure fund from CPA. Now add in the 1% real estate transfer tax. And other than a couple little spots here, we've got it covered. And so we've built up from this menu of options funding sources that would cover the total projected costs. And so all we had left was a couple of blips. Then 2023, we were going to be short $1.4 million. We would have had to find something to cover that shortfall. And in 2036, we were short $500,000, so far enough out that we didn't have to worry about it because we would have more coming on. And so that's how we went about projecting the costs on the overall program. And I suspect we'd probably do something similar here. But more importantly, is what's phase one look like? Because that's what's in front of everybody, and that's what we would be asking people to vote on. And so that's also a handout that you have. And I think it's unfortunately it's on the back of one of these maps. So I just used the planning number we've been using, and it's in our 10-year capital projections of $75 million, which doesn't quite equate to what Dave presented tonight, but maybe we'll get better numbers with DHY and get something closer. So based on $75 million, assuming
I slow you down. I don't know if I have that.
It's
in the back of
It's on the back of
South
the-
Shore Drive.
The main packet.
Yeah.
No, it's in the main packet. It's in the back of this sheet.
I think I'm getting close. Oh, there we go. Stuck together. Got it. Okay. Sorry.
So on $75 million, if we qualified for the 0% SRF funding at a 30-year life, that's $2.5 million of debt service per year. That's pretty easy math. So how do we come up with $2.5 million for phase one? Well, I put down all the options I had on that little menu that I gave you at the last meeting, I think it was. So we got debt drop off, and I put to be determined. I don't know what that is yet. 25% capital surcharge on the user rate. We're, until we do our flow projections and we update everything, I'm not sure what that looks like, but that's a possibility. But remember, this is phase one. We got costs before we have a lot of users connected, so it might not be that reliable for this early part either. But I do know that that wastewater infrastructure fund at 1.5%, using my prior estimate from 2016, was about $1.5 million. So that's still a valid estimate. And I do know that the real estate transfer tax, even though it's a lot of work, if we got that in place, that's $1.5 million. The new thing from 2 years ago is the proposed Airbnb tax, which isn't law yet. But if that were to come to fruition, we had a draft report that I got from the Chamber of Commerce. They're estimated somewhere between 1.5 or 1.6 to 1.8 million dollars. And I looked at some of the estimates they had to make to derive that. Looked very they looked a little optimistic. So I scaled that back, and just for planning purposes, I'm saying $1 million. So just those three items, or just those two items, which are relatively easy in the scheme of things, the wastewater infrastructure fund and the Airbnb tax, if that were to go through, would cover $75 million of debt at 0% for 30 years.
At Airbnb, that $1 million would come to Yarmouth?
That's part of what's, I think, needs to be settled out too. How does it get divvied up?
Yeah, I think the current proposal, which hasn't been signed yet, is not directly back to the towns.
Right.
It goes to a fund that is administered by representatives from the towns, for what it's worth. But that's the current proposal. It could change.
Regional commissioner?
Representatives from the individual towns to be appointed and distribute those funds. That's the current proposal.
Didn't we also talk about the potential increase for meals tax and rooms tax as well? And that, some of the information that we got, Yarmouth was a little light on that compared to other towns.
They're underperforming, yeah.
Right, but we're at our max
You're actually at
rate.
the
Room
state
tax,
limits
yeah.
right now.
No, what
Yeah.
he's saying is if you read when you read the economic
Oh,
report,
right.
Oh, yes.
it says how our existing rooms are underperforming now. And the potential to add more rooms later on.
Right.
This,
Well, that's
you know,
probably part of the sales pitch that you all will be talking about, but
Mm.
as far as a concrete number that we can use to finance a plan,
yeah, they're not there.
we can't,
No,
we can't
no.
finance it on promises of growth, right?
Already maxed.
Because even real estate, if you think about the new growth potential, that's also huge, but you can't nail it down, so.
Right.
You know, I would.
We could put it as a contingency, you know, if that were to happen, or if our new growth now is, say, 400,000, and because of sewering, we start seeing annual new growth figures of 600,000, maybe say anything over a certain amount you'll take and put towards here. But it would be more along the lines of reducing something else that was done, as opposed to counting on it to finance it.
Or it could accelerate a future phase if that
Right.
proved to be worthwhile too.
And we haven't talked about connection fees or betterments or anything like
Right.
that.
So the direction from the selectmen a couple years ago was, I think, no betterments. There seemed to be an adverse opinion of that. But, the discussion always comes back to, as we are fleshing a lot of this out, coming back to that equity issue. So how do you get into one of Dave's tenants? How do you get those who contribute more to the issue to pay more than those that are not contributing as much? So a large hotel versus a single family residence. Now, obviously, they're paying an operating cost that's more. And if you're doing a 25% capital surcharge based on operating, that would be a way to get them to contribute more. But you could also institute a betterment, and you could also institute connection fees based on a larger size meter.
I think the lack of betterments last time was a big sticking point for most people, because they thought that those who use the system should pay more into the system. There were some that agreed, yeah, we should all pay something, but those who are actually getting the benefit of the sewer system should be paying more. So I think the fact that our message from what we heard at the time was people didn't want betterments, we didn't go that way. And when it got to that town meeting, most people in the room felt that, well, if I'm not using it, I shouldn't have to pay as much as that person that is using it.
You could look at a
Some-
mix as well. I mean,
Mm.
maybe just phase one is betterments and not the other phases, or you take it phase by phase. So
Well, that's the other thing, I
Or-
think.
Or
And
you
just-
could have a rate for, say, a typical residential, which would be $400 or $500 for a connection fee or something like that. But, right, when you're talking about a big developer who comes into town and says, hey, you know what, I've got this property here and I want to tie into the sewer, and I'm gonna build 100 units.
there's a number of different ways to do betterments. It doesn't have to be on linear feet. It could be on development units. It could be a number of different ways.
Gallonage.
Right? Gallonage, right?
I think there was a lot of issues
I agree.
the last time around in regards to the unfairness of the way commercial properties are assessed based on their formula and the way residential properties are assessed. And that's why we have currently, I think it's approximately 93% of Yarmouth taxes are paid by residential property owners, and the 7% or 6.5% is paid by business. And there was a lot of discussion on that. I can remember back in 2010, 2011.
I think the betterment issue is an easier discussion this time around in the sense that in the old phase one from 2010 or 11 was a mix of commercial residential. This phase one is almost all commercial.
I agree.
So you could do a betterment for phase one, a commercial betterment, and do something different on residential. You can design a betterment a lot of different ways, and the thing I do like about them, some property owners are maybe more well off or well positioned to handle a larger cost than others. But you can provide for them paying a betterment up front, or you go revert to the default of a 30-year betterment at a very low interest rate. So they just pay as part of their property tax bill over 30 years, and therefore a large betterment doesn't seem so onerous because you're not having to come up with a huge amount of upfront money. If you want to do it, you can. But
And then if someone purchases that property, they can just
they
pay that
purchase the
benefit.
betterment.
They can pay for that betterment right off the
They can
prepay
pay
it.
anytime. You can prepay it,
prepay it.
or you can it just continues with the owner. It's like
Hyannis did that in the mid-'80s. We had property over in Hyannis. And what they did was they put a percentage on your tax bill, and it was very low interest rate. And you had the ability to pay that when you paid your semi-annual tax bill. And then in the event that you sold the property, it would be paid off as a lien. It was a pretty good system.
Up until about 15 years ago, most of these collection systems used to be paid through a betterment type system. That's because most of the sewers were put in to address a failing Title V type system, a small lot, poor soils, high groundwater, sort of the traditional reason you was putting sewers in. It's fallen out of favor the last few years, particularly on Cape Cod, because it's more of a nitrogen issue, and nitrogen's coming from everything in that watershed. And you've defined a sewer service area based on what's most cost efficient to collect number of homes to remove a certain amount of nitrogen. So even though you're not in the system, but you're farther up in that watershed, you're still contributing. So it's more the public good type issue. So just something to keep in mind. Plus, I've done it a few times and I've challenged others to go out and do it. The perception is that if you're connected to a sewer, that home has been bettered or that property has been bettered. Go out and Google the articles on whether a home is bettered or it's actually become devalued by being connected to a sewer system. It's almost 50-50 on a number of studies out there, because the perception is it's been bettered, it's connected to the sewer, don't have to worry about Title V anymore, off you go. The flip side is they now have to pay a sewer user fee every year. They have to pay the connection fee, whether it's $5,000, $10,000 to connect that pipe out. Every time the treatment plant permit changes and there's an increase in cost, they're helping to pay for that cost. So they suddenly have all those costs, somewhat flow related as to how much flow they're using, versus the home that's not on the sewer isn't paying any of those costs. They're paying to pump out their septic system hopefully every few years, and then they replace that every so many years. But so just things to keep in mind when you consider, quote, betterments. The public good issue has really swayed people away from the betterment issue the last few years.
Just an example, and I think I have the right number. I think that's 262 parcels that would be connected on 28. And so back at the time, we had floated the idea of what if you had a flat betterment that everybody paid a certain amount? Everyone's going to participate in this phase one at the same level. But if you're the small, card shop on 28, you're not going to participate as much as the big hotel down the street. And so just for planning and talking purposes, if that amount was $30,000, 262 times $30,000 is $7.8 million. I did done a sensitivity analysis based on water flows at the time to measure based on flows, and I forget the rate we used. But what would be the upper limits of what some of these large properties would have to contribute based on that basis? And it was very significant. So everybody paying $30,000, that's one approach. It doesn't have to be 30, it could be 10,000 or whatever you come up with. That's a flat approach. But if you were to escalate it further based on water usage, there were some instances that these large property owners were paying upwards of $200,000 to $300,000 as a betterment on that basis.
But on the other hand.
So is it worth it though? I mean, is there a value to it? And does it?
Right.
Then you need to change your denominator.
Well, the other thing to consider is that you're building phase one, but it isn't just for the phase one users either.
Right.
True.
So I think that got lost the last time also.
Yeah.
You got a certain capacity in the pipe. This guy over here has got 100 units that he's renting out in the summertime, and he's sucking up 10% of that pipe. Homeowner over here can't even measure the percentage on it, on the pipe. So it just seems like we need a system that says, okay, homeowner, you have to pay something, and we have another system for commercial. I'm not trying to kill the commercial by any means, but
I guess
they're benefiting. And if you had to replace the septic system, let's say you lived there for 20 or 30 years, system is now not working so good, and you want to put your house in the market.
Some towns charge you based on your water usage. Every gallon of water that goes down the drain is what you pay for a sewer betterment. And Milford, we have property up in that area, and we get a sewer betterment every 6 months, sewer betterment bill. And they're substantial. And another thing too, Milford had sewers, I think, back in the 30s. So it's not that they're looking at a tremendous charge, but it's expensive if you look at the betterment. But just following up on Lee's comment, it's based on usage, what you use. And they're always encouraging you to, if you're using a sump pump, contact the water department and they'll help you remove it for obvious reasons, because you're getting charged for sewer betterment of water that goes out the street. So some of those issues are, at some point, everything has to be fair and equitable. And if the Yarmouth resident taxpayer looks at it from that perspective, that gee whiz, the town's doing a hell of a job trying to hold down the cost relative to what we need to achieve. And I think that's the message we got to bring forward.
I think another thing to consider, when you just talked about a number like $200,000. I know of one property owner who spent over $200,000 on a septic system for his hotel. So if you could say to a motel owner, for instance, or a restaurant owner, and again, same case, they're almost hundreds of thousands of dollars to repair or replace their system. I can hook you into the town sewer for even 10% less than that number, and I can finance that for 30 years.
Absolutely.
They'll take it.
Oh.
So I wouldn't get too scared about the commercial users. I think my point even 7 years ago was I think the commercial people were willing to pay whatever it was that they needed to, because it was, such a nuisance to them to lose their parking lot and all the days closed to replace their system and, all those headaches. where a pipe out to the street, all those problems go away for them. And I think that from a businessman standpoint, most people are willing to pay a price to have a problem taken away from them.
I agree.
They look at it differently.
As a manager of a hotel on South Shore Drive, whose septic we thought was failing 2 weeks ago, thankfully it's not. Yeah, we would have been paying.
So if we give you a bill for 300,000, but you can pay it over 30 years at a very low interest rate.
It's gonna go in the bank and get another mortgage for a septic system.
I think something like that for a hotel of our size would probably be exceeding what we were looking for.
Well, it depends on the size of the hotel, obviously.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Just like a restaurant or
Well-
whatever it may be.
Dakota Properties is spending $750,000 to build a septic system.
69 units.
Imagine.
It's not the new development, it's the
opportunity.
problem. It's the old development.
Right.
It's that
Well, but
now it's a new cost.
when you
but
put
they
in,
could've
put a
built
sewer down the
elsewhere.
street, watch how many new developments are gonna.
Rich, that's their margin of profit. That's figured into their profit.
And it's an operational cost
Exactly.
to run that system.
And they're limited by state and federal agencies that are affordable relative to the profit they can make.
But we don't have to have it to be 200,000 or 300,000.
No.
So it can be a whole
Hundreds.
plethora of
Yeah,
choices.
it would have
No, it
like,
very well could be based on water usage or number of
Rooms.
units, whatever.
yeah.
So I think,
But those are things we can narrow
I think
down.
my suggestion is we have to maybe have an overview of what financing might look for the overall plan. But I think we really need to focus on phase one.
That's my feeling.
Yeah.
So
Because as
And
time
phase
goes on,
one's
things are gonna
easy.
change, and you may find that your charts from today, 20 years down the road, don't have to be what
So
they.
we might use
they're
betterments for phase one, and not in phase two, but we might use capital surcharge in phase two, but not in phase one. So
Right.
it's good to have this menu, but we don't have to all be in place at the same time.
Good point.
So I think what I'm hearing, and 'cause basically I need, just like Dave needs some direction to develop this out, I need some direction. So let me kind of get what I'm hearing, I think, is since this is all a commercial phase one, that perhaps a betterment is an option. So I can model that out. I think probably what I will model out is a base charge. And I'm just gonna make up a number just for talking this. Maybe it's $10,000, maybe everybody pays $10,000. But then maybe it's a graduated charge above that for a certain amount of water usage.
Exactly.
Yeah, what's very commonly used is the water meter size.
Well, that was gonna be the third element. And then if there's anything more
relates to
recovery
water.
above and beyond that, that entitled you to a certain size meter. And if you had you'd have a larger meter, a meter charge for any meters that are larger than that standard.
What I was getting at is the typical minimum resident or, the t-shirt commercial shop, they're gonna have the 5/8 inch
Yeah.
water meter.
Mhm.
A hotel that uses a lot of water, they're gonna have the 3 to 4 inch meter. So you can do it graduated based off that, and there's standard flows
Right.
that relate to that. So it's just a standard unit that's often used.
I have probably it's a silly question, but when you base it on the water usage, you're basing it on the existing water usage, which they're using at that point. What happens if they do redevelop now and
Well, that's a
create a
discussion-
much bigger hotel with much bigger water
Well, that's a
rates?
discussion
Does
we
that
started
capture
to
it?
have last time, and we'll have to have again, is you have to determine how much, we have to, I get the terminology, but permit a plan, I guess, for a certain amount of flow, and we're building a plant for that flow. But if then we, let everybody redevelop and they double that flow, we can't do that. So we gotta build in some surplus, and
That's
we
why
gotta
you have-
manage that, and that's part of the elements to get this SR
Besides
funding.
these allocated
Right, to get
for
zero
route
interest loan, you
flows,
need that land use
Thank you.
control.
Yeah.
Dave, what was it in 2011?
What was what?
Additional flow usage relative to new construction?
I'd have to go back and look. I think we had
21% sounds
like
familiar.
50,000 gallons at each of the 3 village center areas for a total of 150, somewhere on that range.
plus build out within each parcel,
Yeah.
existing parcel.
And what build out is, again, is what you can build under current zoning.
Oh, I know.
Doesn't say when it's going to be built. It's just, it could be built.
Shouldn't there be something in the formula to accommodate linear feet and lot size? Because you
Probably-
might have a very different use once the pipe goes by.
But it's all translated to how much
That's all
septic
zoning.
are you
Yeah.
pumping or
I've
producing.
seen that used in other towns.
seems like the water flows has traditionally been the method of use on something like this, just because that translates to how much you're contributing to the issue. You know,
That's today. I'm
Would-
looking at what.
Well, what you would do is you would charge them for what they have today. If they came back and wanted to change their use and you had that within the flow allowance that you're managing to, then you would have a connection fee that would address that increase in water use.
Yeah, that's what they used to do in Chatham, you know, based on if you wanted to redevelop, you paid a connection fee based upon your proposed flow, and you got approved at that level. So you could manage it to that level. Sewer commissioners could.
There's always a possibility, and we've talked about in the past, is actually transfer of development rights too. So you could have a heavy parcel, but you lighten the load somewhere else. So you net out the same.
Yep.
It's just a matter of who's paying the difference.
Keep in mind South Shore Drive, you probably at some point in time in the future see a 5-star national branded hotel there in partners with Davenport companies. And when we were going through that process, that's what he had in mind. And you might even see 1 or 2 on 28 as well. So,
He's looking for a longer season before he spends the money on his own,
exactly.
unless he's forced to.
Well, he always takes partners in. But I think that's the ultimate goal.
Well, again, those water use numbers, if you're switching to a much larger facility, need to be factored into the flow projections that we're generating.
I think we need to know that very soon.
The other thing you need to consider too is that if you did redevelop a property, there's a possibility your water usage is gonna go down, and it may get you in trouble with what you proposed for a rate because of the new codes. You're gonna have, more efficient showers and toilets and faucets and all that, so,
Good point.
you've gotta find a baseline that you work from.
By and large,
You wanna
that has been
encourage
the case, as
conservation,
you
obviously,
know.
but you don't wanna have the town go broke on their fees because that happened and we couldn't plan for it.
Yeah, that is a buffer that's been built in versus the, 2007 to 8 water use that might have been used in your MEP study.
I guess, so I have a little bit of direction on the betterments. I can, generate some scenarios for discussion. How about these other elements? Should we follow through on this wastewater infrastructure fund discussion?
Yeah, I think it's a necessity at this point.
Absolutely.
So I guess I'll lay that out as a separate, one pager, and what that might look like, the timelines involved for when CPA expires. I guess the decision point I would imagine you'd have to talk to the selectmen about would be, you could go up to 3%. You could ask for town meeting to fund it at 3% and do nothing with CPA.
Correct.
Which is kind of what Sanders did. They didn't do that drastic, but
They did 2 and 2.
they did 2 and 2, and said they were at 3% at CPA. They dropped it down to 2% and did 2% in the wastewater infrastructure fund.
I guess the next question, is that something we want to take action on this year if we need legislative approval to change CPA at the 2020 timeframe? So that if we approve the town meeting in 19, that would give them all of 19 and part of 20 to get it done so we could implement it the next year.
It wouldn't go into effect until 21.
Right, but I'm just saying, if the legislation needs to act, we need to give them enough time to do it so that we're not hanging.
Yeah, you need to check with your legal counsel, but I don't believe you need special legislation to do that. You put the date you want that to be in, so if you have to keep paying for the land bank through 2020, then your water infrastructure would kick in 2021. And you put that in your town meeting article.
Somebody said that, so I just want to make sure
The
that's
real
not an
estate
issue.
tax, I believe, would need.
But the real estate tax would need time, yeah.
No. Oh, the transfer tax.
The transfer
Sorry,
tax,
transfer.
yes.
But on the interesting thing, and again, maybe I'll spell this out on a separate piece of paper for you guys to act on, but we have to keep CPA through 2020.
Right.
We could vote today,
Right.
do the wastewater infrastructure fund. Why not do, I'm just talking out loud to get the discussion going, but you could do, say, 1% now. And then next year, do another percent and up it to 2%. Then you can get rid of CPA, drop that 1% and do, it doesn't have to be the one-offs.
Correct.
I know it's all taxpayers' money.
I just get concerned
But-
that,
There's a different approach. That's what I'm saying.
public wise, that they see the offset of, dropping the CPA money in conjunction with doing the
Right,
way.
no, it makes
Well, I think
sense.
that
I don't think they're gonna trust that we're gonna
if
Do
you're going
that in the
down, if you're going down that road,
lie to them before.
and you repurpose, say, 1.5% or 2% of CPA money, that's gonna benefit everyone in Yarmouth, all taxpayers. And I think that it would be pretty easy to get that point across. But I would like to see at least 1% left in CPA. And I serve on that committee, and Tom did as well. But when we first started, we were looking at maybe 24, 26, 28 applications. And they've gone down considerably. Last year, I think there was 8, one was pulled, there was 7. This year, there was 15. But it's unlikely that all 15 will be approved. So the bottom line is that we've done a tremendous amount with the CPA money. And now we're getting to the point where the same individuals are coming back with the same applications, looking to more money for their entities. They're all worthy projects, but it's a repetition now as opposed to new applications coming forward.
The heavier lift on this item here is this real estate transfer tax. And so that requires special legislation. It would require quite a bit of outreach to local groups and other communities to see if they want to partner with us on it. I think, going it alone, trying to get our representatives to pass special legislation just for Yarmouth on something like this might be an uphill battle. But if we could get, whole Cape to approach the delegation to ask them to sponsor it for the Cape, that's probably a little more likely, but then you might, likely to have some opposition from interest groups.
How about state and federal grants? Is there a possibility of getting money from the state and feds?
Well, Chatham got a bunch with the ERA funds back
In
in,
USDA is a possibility.
and I looked into
Didn't you
that.
look into that?
Yeah, and it was pretty short money. West Yarmouth was designated as a certain zone,
Only certain areas.
Yeah.
and the
You have to be under
loans,
10,000 population and a certain economic.
census tract, I think it was. Yeah.
Well, in your experience, Dave, have other towns been successful in that grant area?
The most common and most likely program for you is through that state revolving fund. Trying to qualify for the zero interest loan.
Yeah.
But you also, or at least you have in the past, need to find out if you still would, presume it, you would. You actually qualify for what's known as an environmental justice community, which means you qualify for even better than a 0% loan.
Mhm.
And you, under 2011, we're going to get another, I forget whether it was 10 or 15% below that.
Wow.
We sort of got lost in the
They may
shuffle.
have adjusted those
Yeah,
rates.
so they're always adjusting what the rate is. It's based on what your economic, the economic in the community,
Mhm.
meaning per capita incomes and all those things.
I'm wondering if it would carry any weight, the fact that we're looking at the Cape with a regional approach. It's affecting all.
Whenever you
towns.
do something on a regional basis, you get more points in the SRF program. And as more communities start doing this,
Mhm.
SRF is a competitive program. Only 1/3 of the SRF bucket is deemed to be 0% interest loans.
Mhm.
The rest would be 2%, which when they add their administrative fee is about a 2.4% interest rate, which is still better than if the town went out and bonded something on their own, because you're in the 3.5%, 4% range probably. Now,
Would we need a skilled grant writer to take advantage of this, or is it?
for
pretty basic?
SRF, no, that's pretty basic. We
Basic.
do that for all our communities that we do.
Good.
We just did it for Harwich, for the East Harwich sewers that are going out to bid. And because that is part of a regional program, as we put forth, going to Chatham, they rank the highest on the SRF application and are getting 0% interest for that.
Wow.
So that's about $24 million.
Are any other towns on the Cape that you know of have talked about this real estate transfer tax? I mean, I know Provincetown has a real estate transfer tax for affordable housing, but do you know of any that have actually broached this subject as like?
I've broached it to a handful of towns.
Can we go through the regional, Cape Cod Commission?
They'd have to be willing to champion the cause.
Right.
It'd be the same process that we'd probably go through, reaching out to each community, one-on-one meetings, trying to garner support,
Fighting with the realtors.
and then
That would be the big
And
one.
I think back the time I talked to a couple of the legislative delegations, and their first response was, happy to do, if you had a group of towns and that's what you're telling us, we'd be happy to do something. But what about the realtors? And so, they're looking at the whole region as a whole, not just our interest of how to fund wastewater. So that remains to be, that's why this piece that's a heavy lift. And that's a multi-year process, probably a 2-year process if everything went well, just to get the legislation effective.
And the reason Rich mentioned it was an uphill battle is there are communities that have filed for this. Chatham was one back in 2009 with their first phase. Town meeting authorized the filing of special legislation. They did that. They went through it, and it didn't go anywhere. So that's why going it on your own, as Rich mentioned, as one town, there's a history of that not moving forward. So.
Yeah, it seems a bit risky to me with all the
but
options.
It makes a lot of sense in the sense that if people were selling their properties, they're getting out of this deal.
When you lived here a period of time, then you're part of the problem, I agree.
Oh, I think it absolutely makes sense. I just think it's a lot of work. And when there's other potentially lower hanging fruit, that maybe it's a better way to go. Not that there's any low hanging fruit, but
Do we think that this may be something that we can,
I think the
add
selectmen will
on
weigh in on it too.
in the future?
Obviously, they have to champion it more.
Yeah. Exactly.
Well, we can leave it as an option.
Could be one of those items, like I said, I think just these 2 items, other than that, if this fell into place, then, covers the debt service. And that's before we have any capital surcharge or betterments or anything.
Mhm.
So it might be one of those elements that it's on the menu and we can work it and consider it for future phases or.
Yeah, I mean, you presented that you want to consider it potential for phase 2, 3, or 4, but it's not going to be available for phase 1 type of thing.
Right.
Yeah.
And it's showing the community that you're continuing to look for other options and something else may come along.
Yeah, I think, again, personally, I think the economic development potential could change the picture on the other phases really quick. Okay. So pretty well covered that. Staff's gonna get some more updates on that. All right, committee member and staff updates. Do we have anything else? Anybody?
I have one
Okay.
mention. I have to leave for Florida, so I won't be at the December meeting date.
You gonna get nominated this one?
I won't be in Florida. You can nominate me. I will be happy to phone in. I will do my homework, though. I will still do that, and I will still contact with about some of the ideas and stuff like that. And I'll still be available. And I'll be back. I'll be back before the January meeting.
Anybody else have anything? Staff?
Let's pass this around. If you could I have your emails, but if you could put a phone number, the best number to contact you, and I'll email this out to the committee so we have contact information for everybody.
Just remember not to deliberate with each other.
And another reason is I will be reaching out to follow up on some of the items from tonight on the outreach and marketing.
One item that I have that Jocelyn brought to my attention was that there is a marketing campaign associated with Love Your Local Water that the Cape Cod Cooperative Extension is pushing. There's some stickers that they have, but they have some flyers and other things. We had a lengthy discussion tonight about outreach, so just wanted to share that as an example that another entity is doing to embrace clean water.
I think it's great.
I like that.
That's the one you brought up last week.
Mhm.
Yeah, I didn't know who had
It's a cooperative extension.
Yeah, it's actually about chemical spills, right?
Yeah,
Chemical
it's all of
and
it.
pharmaceuticals.
Yeah,
I think
hazardous cleanup day.
I didn't know, I know you had put on, Rich, some meeting dates, but I didn't know if the committee wanted to try to continue to meet more than monthly. We do have some dates, if you do want to do that we could potentially meet.
We talked
I
about
thought we should,
some Wednesday meetings, but we haven't heard it back from anybody about the conflict with the planning board over the hearing room. Not that we have to meet there, but I know it was said that it would be easier for everybody, if we're gonna televise these meetings or record them, to do it in that room.
Well,
So your
actually,
next meeting
it's easier for
is
this one with this setup.
Tuesday, the 11th, right? So we could meet the following week after that, because if you skip the 2, you're into the holiday week. So we could do the 18th or 19th, which is a Tuesday or Wednesday, if you wanted a second meeting in December.
Because the 11th is already tentatively scheduled, right?
Yes.
Good.
not gonna-
Or you could skip to the following week. We could do the 27th, which is a Thursday.
But they, again, Karen had talked about at the last meeting, getting rid of the workshop meetings and just doing the regular meetings, like changing that a little bit, and then it would offer up maybe 1 or 2 Wednesdays a month to make it easier on some people. I know Mark Forrest wants to participate in this too, and obviously Tuesdays are not a good night for him.
True.
If he gets rid of his second job, it might get easier,
Yeah.
because he's
He's got his
Bruce is
hands
doing
full.
something tonight.
It's got his hands full down there.
So. Do we have, I guess the question is, do we have enough to accomplish meeting more often right now? Is that not too fast for us to get answers back from the things that we're raising right now?
Well, we're crunching numbers, and, you know, we're happy to share them where we are with you and be getting feedback. Sounds like Rich is going to be starting to do some preliminary stuff, so I don't know what you.
If you think you can move the information fast enough to make it worthwhile for us to meet, I'm fine with that, especially if we don't have to have 3-hour meetings.
Well, I was going to say, the other question you have is, you know, is it more productive for you folks to have 1 3-hour meeting or 2 2-hour meetings type of thing?
I'm fine meeting as often or as little as we need to, as long as we, the time is used well. That's my concern.
I agree.
I mean, you come back to the next meeting, we could easily, even if we didn't do anything, we could give you the overview of the DHY agreement. And then you could aggregate the 5 questions that you're each going to bring back
Yeah, I think that's.
at next
gonna be
meeting,
good.
and they create the full list of the 5 groups that you all come up with that need to be educated. So
Okay,
that's a meeting in itself.
so you're saying the 11th?
Well, we're scheduled for the
11th,
11th.
Oh, you
Already.
The
Yeah,
18th.
we asked it.
I'm suggesting you could either do the 18th, 19th, or 27th, if any of those meet your fancy or your needs.
Say the
18th or the 27th.
18th is not that good. I mean, I can make it, but I have to push something else out. The 27th will be a Thursday?
Yes.
That should be all right with me, but
Yeah.
I know it's kind of a weird time with the holidays for everybody.
Right.
I won't be here.
Yeah,
I won't be here for the month of December.
The whole month? Wow. Well, what does everybody else think? Not up to me.
I, you
I'd go
know,
with it. We're picking up some momentum.
yeah,
So you're gonna substitute the 18th for the 11th?
No, both.
No,
No, do both.
be the 11th and either the 18th or the 27th.
It's a
Yeah.
good move.
Which one?
I can't make the 27th.
All right, how about the 18th for everybody? Is that?
It looks like the 18th is a selectmen's meeting though, just for what it's worth.
We do it up here.
Yeah, 18th is a selectmen's meeting.
Do we have a room on the 18th?
Do we know
We
what,
can do it here.
Probably here.
does the selectmen's meeting require you to? Do you, either one of you? Okay,
Not as of right now.
and should we move to try to schedule every other, twice a month from this point forward, or we should play it by ear?
yeah, let's go by you. I think the next meeting or 2, we'll figure it out, because
Okay,
at some point, I think when we start to get a little better handle on this, and not in the very distant future, I think we need to sit down with the selectmen and see if we're not going in the wrong direction. They're not gonna be happy with what we're doing, and try and back us all up after we get moving along here. I don't wanna lose the momentum. I'd rather
So I think we need to
That's a good point.
compile some more information first.
We need to get some more information first, but like maybe we run some of this by them and make sure that they can live with it.
Get a little idea whether we're gonna be backed on this or not.
Right,
Would be
'cause
nice.
They really didn't happen.
Just saying.
That didn't happen last time either.
You know, it'd be hard to believe that they would not be behind all this. That being said,
Hmm.
sure is nice to know it.
Okay. Anything else? Motion to adjourn?
Move.
Second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Again, thank you for your time.
129.
Oh, yeah.